Chapter 1596. I'm back, Su Ming said calmly. As soon as the words left his mouth, the coffin in which Dao Han sat began to crack. More and more cracks spread out, and then the coffin shattered into pieces. Dao Han stepped out from within. His face was still pale, but there was a hint of madness and excitement in his eyes. This sort of excitement was incredibly rare on him. He stared at Su Ming in a daze, and after a long time, he threw his head back and laughed. "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back." As he laughed, anguish appeared on Dao Han's smile. He was a cultivator who had treated Su Ming rather coldly and was also a powerful warrior who treated Su Ming coldly. "They're dead. They're all dead. Su Zhongfan died, and one great sect elder after another died. Only I and two other great sect elders are left. Only the three of us are left. Right now, there are only 3 great sect elders left in Seven Moons sect. My injuries might seem severe, but they are lighter than the other 2. One of them had his body destroyed, and only his nascent divinity remained. The other's nascent divinity was mostly destroyed. I don't know whether there will be anyone who will wake up in this life." Dao Han took a few steps back. Monstrous hatred appeared in his eyes while he was in anguish. "One Dao sect, huh?" Su Ming asked after a moment of silence. "Yes, it's one Dao sect. When the dimension where the tree of Dao verification was destroyed, many cultivators from the 7 sects and 13 clans died in it. 100 years later, Bai Lu and Qiyang, 2 great Dao paragons from one Dao sect, descended in Seven Moons sect and carried out a massacre. In the end, if it weren't for sect elder Gutai risking his life and giving up on the possibility of becoming a great Dao paragon to self-destruct and descend on Seven Moons sect's ancestral spirit, forcing Bai Lu and Qiyang to temporarily retreat, his friends of many years coming to help, and Azura clan's immortal Qing Han stopping them, then what you would see would be ruins. They're all dead." Dao Han's laughter was shrill and forlorn. As his voice echoed in the air, it was as if all the vengeful souls who died in the massacre in the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky had been stirred up. "Third Prince, you." As Dao Han's voice echoed in the air, Su Ming turned around and walked into the distance. By the looks of it, he wanted to leave the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky. This action caused Dao Han to feel anguish. When he stared at Su Ming's back, he could not even speak. He understood that Dao Han could help Seven Moons sect, but if their enemy was one Dao sect, then even if he had become a great Dao paragon, he would still be a little wary. He had returned to Seven Moons sect to take a look, and it seemed like he was just doing it to show some of the friendship they had shared in the past. Dao Han would not ask for too many things in anguish. His only hope was that Seven Moons sect would have a glorious day under Dao Han's protection. This was Gu Tai's wish before he died. It was also Su Zhongfan's wish. At this moment, it also became Dao Han's wish. "It will be difficult for me to stay in ancient Zong for long, but I will make one Dao sect pay with their blood. This is my repayment to Seven Moons sect." When Su Ming walked out of the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky, his footsteps came to a halt. When he spoke, he had already stepped out of the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky. His words echoed in the air and landed in Dao Han's ears. In silence, he stared at Su Ming leaving into the distance. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. These words already expressed Su Ming's thoughts, and there was a bloody air about them. The events of the past seemed to appear in his mind, along with the memories of the first time he met Su Ming. Su Ming left Seven Moons sect and the region. He walked in the sky, and with one quiet step at a time, he arrived at a forest. It was right next to the small mountain village in Su Ming's memories. When he looked into the distance, melancholy appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The mountain village was no longer around. In fact, not even its ruins were left behind. It had become a part of the forest. Many things could change in 2,000-something years. Stories of things changing and people changing would always happen in every corner of the world. There was no longer any trace of the mountain village. The sound of wood being cut had already become a murmur of time. Su Ming stared at it in midair for a long time until he descended. Based on his memories, he walked through the forest and the mountain village that had once been there. Su Ming walked past the smithy, the village house that sold wine, and the house that belonged to the old man. He looked at the trees around him and quietly sat down cross-legged, just like how he had sat in the old man's courtyard in the past. He cut wood and listened to the old man's occasionally discordant voice. He sat there quietly from sunset to sunrise, from morning to dusk. There was no longer the sound of wood being cut, no white dogs following him, and no more of the old man's nagging. Su Ming was the only one left in this place. He sat there quietly until snow fell from the sky and landed on his body and on his head. It snowed through the night. When the next morning arrived, Su Ming opened his eyes. When he stood up, he turned his head around and cast a glance at the area behind him. In silence, he slowly walked into the forest and walked into the distance. His back was incredibly bleak. There was loneliness and desolation about him. Sunlight could not shine on his body. Only the snow and wind remained, as if they could follow him down the path. However, while the snow and wind might seem the same, in truth, once he walked into the distance, he would find that the snowflakes by his side were no longer the same as they were in the past. The snowflakes that followed him all the way seemed to be the same, but were different. Perhaps only the wind would stay by his side forever and never change. Su Ming continued walking until he walked out of the forest. He walked in the morning, walked into the sky, and continued walking until one day Su Ming arrived in front of a temple. The temple looked very dilapidated, as if it could collapse in the wind, as if it could be crushed by snowflakes. But it still stood there. The ancient feeling it gave off was proof that it had existed for countless years. There were 3 statues in the temple. Their faces could no longer be seen clearly. The only thing that could be seen were the cracks that covered every inch of their bodies. They were packed densely together, and they covered their entire bodies. The temple was very quiet. Only the moaning of the wind outside could be heard when it blew past. Aside from that, there was no other sound. Su Ming stood in the temple calmly and cast a glance at the 3 statues with a cold and indifferent gaze. With Su Ming's current level of cultivation, it would not be difficult for him to find one Dao sect. One Dao sect. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he lifted his right hand and swung it in front of him. With it, the sky and the world outside returned to normal. The wind also continued blowing, but a windstorm stirred up in the temple. It brought with it an astonishing roar that instantly swept through the entire temple. Immediately, light shone from the cracks on the 3 statues, as if they had formed a rune in the shape of a net. Su Ming's expression was calm. At the instant the net-like rune appeared, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. A loud bang shot up, and the net-like rune seemed to be unable to withstand Su Ming's approach. It immediately shattered layer by layer, and in the span of a breath, it shattered, allowing Su Ming to step through it without facing any obstruction. Su Ming's step felt as if time and space around him had distorted. When everything became clear, he appeared in a world. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and the ground was pitch black. Countless volcanoes could be seen in the distance, and he could also see 3 huge statues around him. However, there were 2 statues among them, and one of them was broken. The moment Su Ming stepped into the place, the sky started rotating as if it had turned into a huge vortex. Piercing sounds echoed in the air, as if warning the cultivators in the area that a powerful enemy had invaded. One Dao sect. Since the people in this sect always like to use the power of great Dao paragons to force their way into other sects and clans and suppress them with their power, then today I will give it a try as well, Su Ming said faintly. His voice instantly spread through the entire world of One Dao sect. As his voice traveled outwards, a large number of volcanoes in the distance crumbled with a bang, as if they could not withstand the mighty pressure contained in Su Ming's voice. In fact, even the ground started trembling violently at that moment. Cries of surprise echoed in the air, and Su Ming saw cultivators flying out from the towers located in various spots on the ground. How dare you barge into One Dao sect? Almost at the same time the figures flew out, a shout of rebuke rang out. That shout had practically been instinctive, But even the person who had shouted it immediately regretted it, because the rumbles from the volcanoes around him had already revealed Su Ming's level of cultivation. Su Ming's expression was aloof. He did not even look at the figures who flew out. He just walked forward and walked towards one of the three statues in the distance. The moment he walked out, several long arcs flew up in front of him. When they closed in on him, the power of divine abilities and arts manifested, but Su Ming remained calm and let out a cold harumph. With a cold harumph, the world immediately roared. With Su Ming as the center, a layer of ripples instantly spread out. The expressions of the incoming cultivators changed drastically. In fact, they did not even have the time to scream in pain before their bodies distorted under the ripples. Then, they crumbled and turned into a rain of blood. It's been a long time since I've killed like this, one Dao sect. When Su Ming said those words faintly, a powerful hint of killing intent shone in his eyes. He lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pushed down on the ground below him through the air. With it, the ground immediately roared. Once the volcanoes crumbled, the ground shattered, and a great, mighty pressure from Su Ming instantly descended on the entire world. When his third eye opened at the center of his brow, it clearly revealed the 8th level great Dao Paragon shining with endless black light. Let darkness descend on the land. Let night replace daylight. Let slaughter turn into a seal. The debt of blood will only be repaid with the blood of all one Dao sect members. Su Ming's voice spread out. As the ground roared, it still clearly entered the hearts of all the cultivators in one Dao sect. Great Dao Paragon. He's a great Dao Paragon. Cries of surprise instantly echoed in the air. At that moment, a cold harumph came from the statue in the distance. When it echoed in the air, the ground immediately stopped crumbling. At the same time, a long arc charged towards Su Ming like a shooting star. That long arc also exuded the power of a great Dao Paragon. I have to attend the annual meeting tomorrow. Since I have to attend a press conference regarding the copyright of my new book on the way, I have to leave beforehand. This time, the annual meeting will be held in Guangzhou. If the fellow Taoists in Guangzhou want to personally see the effects of my weight loss, you can gather there. Haha, I will be posting the details on my Prestige channel at any time. Please pay attention to me. Wherever I go, I will be posting. Chapter 1597. Under the setting sun was ancient Zong, far away from the center of the land and the capital of ancient Zong. Where Seven Moons sect was located, snow fell from the sky. Snowflakes fell from the sky and covered the land. They connected to the sky and seemed to cover up quite a bit of Seven Moons sect's glory. Time flowed by just like how Su Ming had accompanied Hao Hao. To ancient Zong, 2,700 years had passed. To any country, the changes during those 2,700 years were not short. Even the world of cultivators, there were too many deaths and deaths during those 2,700 years. Seven Moons sect was a powerful sect among the 7 sects and 13 clans in ancient Zong nearly 3,000 years ago. By then, it had already fallen into decline. From the distance, the entire sect was filled with an oppressive air. The falling snowflakes might not be able to land in sky beyond the sky, but the withering air spreading out from sky beyond the sky made a person standing at the top of a mountain in the distance and staring at Seven Moons sect sense an ancient air. It was a young man dressed in a simple long black robe. He had a head full of white hair and looked to be about 26 or 27 years old, but there was an indescribable ancient air about him, as if he had lived for far too long. 5,000-something years of practicing Tao. I've walked through many worlds and met many faces. The number of people who died in my hands is innumerable, and now I have become a great Dao Paragon. The young man stared at Seven Moons sect in the distance, and in the snow and wind, he let out a long sigh. He was Su Ming, the Su Ming who had walked out of the once glorious world. Su Ming stared at Seven Moons sect and remained silent for a moment before he lifted his foot and walked forward. He walked into Seven Moons sect's outer sect and saw that there were no longer as many Seven Moons sect disciples as he remembered. There were only a few hundred of them. Most of the outer sect disciples were unfamiliar to Su Ming. In fact, even the attendants of the outer sect did not exist in his memories. Too many things had changed. When Su Ming reached the first layer of sky beyond the sky, he went to the second layer, the second layer. When he reached the fifth layer of sky beyond the sky, he did not see Lan Lan, but he did see her memorial tablet. It was placed in the palace belonging to the Third Line's mountain in the fifth layer of sky beyond the sky. It was placed in the temple behind the palace. There was a middle-aged woman dressed in a Taoist robe outside the temple. She held a broom and sat under the roof of the temple while staring quietly into the distance. Su Ming had some impression of the woman. She was Lan Lan of the Third Line. However, after more than 2,000 years, the delicate and pretty girl from back then had already become middle-aged. Su Ming walked into the courtyard outside the spirit hall in the wind and snow. As he stepped on the snow, he left behind a trail as he walked to the middle-aged woman's side. As if she had just noticed that there was someone in front of her, the middle-aged woman raised her head. Lan Lan of sky. Lan of sky beyond the mountain. Su Ming's face was incredibly unfamiliar to her, but the presence coming from his body made it impossible for her to feel any hostility towards him. In fact, for some unknown reason, she felt a sense of familiarity towards him, and that was why she instinctively asked this question. I came to visit Sect Elder Lan Lan. Su Ming's gaze fell on the door to the spirit hall, and a hint of melancholy appeared on his face as he spoke softly. His words fell into the middle-aged woman's ears, and she fell silent. Su Ming's arrival might be unfamiliar to her, but at that moment, it was as if her heart had been affected. Not a single hint of change could be seen on her face. Instead, she stared at Su Ming in a daze, as if all the words and actions of this person before her had fused together with the world. Everything was so natural. It was as if his arrival had been predestined by the heavens. You. The middle-aged woman hesitated. After a moment of hesitation, the middle-aged woman softly said, Master died 1,900 years ago. Su Ming remained silent. After a long while, he lifted his foot and walked towards the spirit hall. The middle-aged woman did not stop him and allowed him to push open the door to the spirit hall. Once he stepped in, the door slowly closed behind him. Within the spirit temple, dozens of memorial tablets could be seen on the tribute dais, all of which belonged to the third bloodline. From ancient times until now, all of the people who qualified to be enshrined here had perished and had been carved into memorial tablets by the sect, so that future generations would never forget them. Su Ming stood there, and his gaze fell on the last memorial tablet. There were 4 words carved clearly on it. Sect Elder Lan Lan. Su Ming stared at the 4 words quietly, then slowly closed his eyes. In the darkness where he closed his eyes and the silence in the spirit hall, Su Ming felt as if he had returned to the time when he first saw Lan Lan many years ago. Lan Lan, who gave Su Ming the feeling that she was Fong Tsang Lan, made him understand a long time ago that she was the Fong Tsang Lan of this world. Su Ming had always avoided having too much contact with her because he was afraid of losing himself in the end. Memories rose in his mind. When the time it takes for an incense stick to burn past, Su Ming opened his eyes. When he turned around, he walked out of the spirit hall. Why did she die? He asked faintly. The middle-aged woman was silent for a moment before she answered softly. One Tao sect. Su Ming nodded and did not say anything else. He walked forward and left the palace at the top of the mountain. He arrived at his lodgings in the 5th layer of sky beyond the sky in Seven Moon sect. That place was not much different from how it was in his memories, but it was now covered in dust. Su Ming stood by the cliff and stared at his former lodgings. After a long while, when he turned his head around, he saw Yi Wang meditating on the mountain belonging to the first line in the 5th layer of sky beyond the sky. His middle-aged appearance, his great power, and the level-headedness on his face meant that Yi Wang had already become a sect elder. Su Ming averted his gaze and walked to the 6th layer of sky beyond the sky. When he arrived at the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky in Seven Moon sect, a brilliant light slowly shone in his eyes. That quiet light shone in Su Ming's eyes, which had mostly been calm over the years, and it had not appeared for a long time. Even though he had told himself many times that ancient Zong was just a possession between him and Xian Zong, killing intent still gradually appeared in his eyes. The seventh layer of sky beyond the sky had already been reduced to ruins. There were once around a dozen continents, but now only 3 remained. The others were reduced to ruins and floated in the world like dust. The mighty pressure belonging to great Tao paragons still filled the land faintly. Su Ming could already imagine that many years ago, a great Tao paragon had come with a monstrous rage and nearly destroyed the place, which was why his presence still remained. The remaining 3 continents were in dead silence at that moment. Only Su Ming sensed the presences of 3 people at the highest peaks of the 3 continents. They belonged to Dao Han and the other 2 former great sect elders. Gu Tai and Su Zhongfan were not present. The 3 people's presences were incredibly weak, as if they were heavily injured. At that moment, they were in a state of hibernation and would need an endless amount of time to slowly recover. The killing intent in Su Ming's eyes was gradually suppressed. Once it fused with his presence, he swept his gaze past the 3 continents. In the end, his eyes landed on the first continent. He moved forward, and in an instant, he appeared at the highest peak of the continent. There was a huge platform at the top of the mountain. There was a huge rune on it, and at the center of the rune was a spot about the size of a fist. It was like a small pit. As a former disciple of Seven Moons sect, Su Ming knew about Seven Moons sect's existence as he stared at the small pit. During each generation, if there was nothing major happening, only one great sect elder would wake up and take charge of Seven Moons sect. The other great sect elders would sleep to train. The method to wake up a great sect elder required blood that had been infused with 7 lives art to wake up the sleeping great sect elder. It was just like how Lon Lon had used this method to wake up Su Zhongfan in the past. Su Ming stood on the rune and remained silent for a moment. When he lifted his right hand, he cut the tip of his finger, and his blood dripped down into the small pit at the bottom. When 9 drops of blood dripped down, Su Ming swung his right arm, and no more blood dripped down. Instead, he stood there and waited quietly. The blood in the small pit at the center of the rune instantly disappeared. At that instant, the entire rune shone with a blood-red light. At the same time that light shot into the sky, a roar that seemed to have come from hell came from the mountain with a loud rumble. At the same time, as the light from the rune shone, the rune looked as if it had started rotating. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, a gigantic crack immediately spread out from the center of the rune. A dark ice coffin slowly floated up, then stood erect before it landed on the ground with a bang, right in front of Su Ming. Through the lid of the dark ice coffin, Su Ming saw Dao Han, who was withered and had his eyes tightly shut. He also saw a hideous gash on Dao Han's chest. That gash had pierced through his body and severed his heart meridian. His body was as withered as a skeleton. When Su Ming looked over, the entire coffin instantly turned blood red. Gradually, the mummy-like skeleton started squirming. In just the span of a dozen-something breaths, Dao Han returned to his previous appearance in Su Ming's memories. Who woke me up? Another roar rang out. Dao Han's eyes flew open in the coffin. This was the first time he opened his eyes since he fell into a deep slumber after being heavily injured during Seven Moons sect's disaster nearly 2,000 years ago. Almost at the instant he opened his eyes, Su Ming's figure appeared in his pupils. At the instant he saw Su Ming, Dao Han's pupils shrank. He could clearly sense the power of a great Tao paragon from Su Ming's body. At that instant, he also noticed that the area above his chest where his heart meridian had been cut was showing signs of healing. You are. Dao Han's expression was solemn. His expression did not relax even though his injuries had healed. Instead, his gaze became even fiercer, but there was a hint of excitement hidden in the depths of that fierceness. He was not unfamiliar with Su Ming's presence. Even though it belonged to a great Tao paragon, he would never forget it. However, Su Ming's appearance had changed quite a lot. At that moment, What appeared before him was Su Ming's true appearance in harmonious Morris Alba. Do you still have any recommendation votes? Chapter 1598. I'm back, Su Ming said calmly. As soon as the words left his mouth, the coffin in which Dao Han sat began to crack. More and more cracks spread out, and then the coffin shattered into pieces. Dao Han stepped out from within. His face was still pale, but there was a hint of madness and excitement in his eyes. This sort of excitement was incredibly rare on him. He stared at Su Ming in a daze, and after a long, long time, he threw his head back and laughed. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. As he laughed, anguish appeared on Dao Han's smile. He was a cultivator who had treated Su Ming rather coldly, and was also a powerful warrior who treated Su Ming coldly. They're dead. They're all dead. Su Zhongfan died, and one great sect elder after another died. Only I and two other great sect elders are left. Only the three of us are left. Right now, there are only 3 great sect elders left in Seven Moons sect. My injuries might seem severe, but they are lighter than the other 2. One of them had his body destroyed, and only his nascent divinity remained. The other's nascent divinity was mostly destroyed. I don't know whether there will be anyone who will wake up in this life. Dao Han took a few steps back, and monstrous hatred appeared in his eyes. One Dao sect, huh? Su Ming asked after a moment of silence. Yes, it's one Dao sect. When the dimension where the tree of Dao verification was destroyed, many cultivators from the 7 sects and 13 clans died in it. 100 years later, Bai Lu and Qi Yang, 2 great Dao paragons from one Dao sect, descended in Seven Moons sect and carried out a massacre. In the end, if it weren't for sect elder Gutai risking his life and giving up on the possibility of becoming a great Dao paragon to self-destruct and descend on Seven Moons sect's ancestral spirit, forcing Bai Lu and Qi Yang to temporarily retreat, his friends of many years coming to help, and Azura clan's immortal Qing Han stopping them, then what you would see would be ruins. They're all dead. Dao Han's laughter was shrill and forlorn. As his voice echoed in the air, it was as if the vengeful souls who died in the massacre in the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky had been stirred up. Third Prince, you. As Dao Han's voice echoed in the air, Su Ming turned around and walked into the distance. By the looks of it, he wanted to leave the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky. This action caused Dao Han to feel anguish. When he stared at Su Ming's back, he could not even say a word. He understood that Dao Han could help Seven Moons sect, but if their enemy was one Dao sect, then even if he had become a great Dao paragon, he would still be a little wary. He had returned to Seven Moons sect to take a look, and it seemed like he was just doing it to show some of the friendship they had shared in the past. Dao Han would not ask for too many things in anguish. His only hope was that Seven Moons sect would have a glorious day under Dao Han's protection. This was Gu Tai's wish before he died. It was also Su Zhongfan's wish. At this moment, it also became Dao Han's wish. It will be difficult for me to stay in ancient Zong for long, but I will make one Dao sect pay with their blood. This is my repayment to Seven Moons sect. When Su Ming walked out of the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky, his footsteps came to a halt. When he spoke, he had already stepped out of the 7th layer of sky beyond the sky. His words echoed in the air and landed in Dao Han's ears. In silence, he stared at Su Ming leaving into the distance. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. These words already expressed Su Ming's thoughts, and there was a bloody air about them. The events of the past seemed to appear in his mind, along with the memories of the first time he met Su Ming. Su Ming left Seven Moons sect and the region. He walked in the sky, and with one quiet step at a time, he arrived at a forest. It was right next to the small mountain village in Su Ming's memories. When he looked into the distance, melancholy appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The mountain village was no longer around. In fact, not even its ruins were left behind. It had become a part of the forest. Many things could change in 2,000-something years. Stories of things changing and people changing would always happen in every corner of the world. There was no longer any trace of the mountain village. The sound of wood being cut had already become a murmur of time. Su Ming stared at it in midair for a long, long time until he descended. Based on his memories, he walked through the forest and the mountain village that had once been there. Su Ming walked past the smithy, the village house that sold wine, and the house that belonged to the old man. He looked at the trees around him and quietly sat down cross-legged, just like how he had sat in the old man's courtyard in the past. He cut wood and listened to the old man's occasionally discordant voice. He sat there quietly from sunset to sunrise, from morning to dusk. There was no longer the sound of wood being cut, no white dogs following him, and no more of the old man's nagging. Su Ming was the only one left in this place. He sat there quietly until snow fell from the sky and landed on his body and on his head. It snowed through the night. When the next morning arrived, Su Ming opened his eyes. When he stood up, he turned his head around and cast a glance at the area behind him. In silence, he slowly walked into the forest and walked into the distance. His back was incredibly bleak. There was loneliness and desolation about him. Sunlight could not shine on his body. Only the snow and wind remained, as if they could follow him down the path. However, while the snow and wind might seem the same, in truth, once he walked into the distance, he would find that the snowflakes by his side were no longer the same as they were in the past. The snowflakes that followed him all the way seemed to be the same, but were different. Perhaps only the wind would remain by his side, and it would never change. Su Ming continued walking until he walked out of the forest. He walked into the morning, walked into the sky, and continued walking until one day Su Ming arrived in front of the temple. The temple looked very dilapidated, as if it could collapse in the wind, as if it could be crushed by snowflakes. But it still stood there. The ancient feeling it gave off was proof that it had existed for countless years. There were 3 statues in the temple. Their faces could no longer be seen clearly. The only things that could be seen were the cracks that covered their bodies. They were packed densely together and covered their entire bodies. The temple was very quiet. The only sound that could be heard was the moaning of the wind as it blew past. Besides that, there were no other sounds. Su Ming stood calmly in the temple, and with an aloof gaze, he cast a glance at the 3 statues. With his current level of cultivation, it would not be difficult for him to find one Dao sect. One Dao sect. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he lifted his right hand and swung it in front of him. With it, the sky and the world outside returned to normal. The wind also continued blowing, but a windstorm stirred up in the temple. It brought with it an astonishing roar that instantly swept through the entire temple. Immediately, light shone from the cracks on the 3 statues, as if they had formed a rune in the shape of a net. Su Ming's expression was calm. At the instant the net-shaped rune appeared, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. A loud bang shot up, and the net-shaped rune seemed to be unable to withstand Su Ming's approach. It immediately shattered layer by layer, and in the span of a breath, it crumbled, allowing Su Ming to step through it without facing any obstruction. That one step felt like an illusion. The area around Su Ming seemed to have distorted. When everything became clear, he appeared in a world. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and the ground was pitch black. Countless volcanoes could be seen in the distance, and he could also see 3 huge statues around him. However, there were 2 statues among them, and one of them was broken. The moment Su Ming stepped into the place, the sky started rotating as if it had turned into a huge vortex. Piercing screeches echoed in the air, as if warning the cultivators in the area that a powerful enemy had invaded them. One Dao sect. Since the people in this sect always like to use the power of great Dao paragons to force their way into other sects and clans and suppress them with their power, then today I might as well give it a try as well, Su Ming said faintly. His voice instantly spread through the entire world of One Dao sect. As his voice traveled outwards, a large number of volcanoes in the distance crumbled with a bang, as if they could not withstand the mighty pressure contained in Su Ming's voice. In fact, even the ground started trembling violently at that moment. Cries of surprise echoed in the air, and Su Ming saw cultivators flying out from the towers in various spots on the ground. How dare you barge into one Tao sect? Almost at the same time the figures flew out, a shout of rebuke rang out. That shout had practically been instinctive, but even the person who had shouted it immediately regretted it, because the rumbles from the volcanoes around him had already revealed Su Ming's level of cultivation. Su Ming's expression was aloof. He did not even spare a glance at the figures who flew out. He just walked forward to one of the 3 statues in the distance. The moment he walked out, several long arcs flew up in front of him. When they closed in on him, the power of divine abilities and arts manifested, but Su Ming's expression remained calm. He let out a cold harumph. With a cold harumph, the world immediately roared. With Su Ming as the center, a layer of ripples instantly spread out. The expressions of the incoming cultivators changed drastically. In fact, they did not even manage to scream in pain before their bodies distorted under the ripples. They crumbled and turned into a rain of blood. It's been a long time since I've killed like this one Tao sect. When Su Ming said those words faintly, a powerful hint of killing intent shone in his eyes. He lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pushed down on the ground beneath him through the air. With it, the ground immediately roared. Once the volcanoes crumbled, the ground shattered, and a great, mighty pressure from Su Ming instantly descended on the entire world. When his third eye opened at the center of his brow, it clearly revealed the 8th level great Tao Paragon shining with endless black light. Let darkness descend on the land. Let night replace daylight. Let slaughter turn into a seal. The debt of blood will only be repaid with the blood of all one Tao sect members. Su Ming's voice spread out. As the ground roared, it still clearly entered the hearts of all the cultivators in one Tao sect. Great Tao Paragon. He's a great Tao Paragon. Cries of surprise instantly echoed in the air. At that moment, a cold harumph came from the statue in the distance. When it echoed in the air, the ground immediately stopped crumbling. At the same time, a long arc charged towards Su Ming like a shooting star. That long arc also exuded the power of a great Tao Paragon. Su Ming was going to attend the annual meeting the next day. Since he had to attend a press conference regarding the copyright of his new book on the way, he had to attend it 2 days earlier. The location of the annual meeting was in Guangzhou. If any of the fellow Taoists in Guangzhou wanted to personally see the effects of ear roots weight loss, they could come to the gathering. Wherever they went, they would send it. Perhaps when they saw it, they would discover that, that fatty fiddling with his phone in the distance seems to be ear root. Chapter 1599. It was Sun Mu. Great Tao Paragon Sun Mu had forcefully descended on Seven Moon Sect and started the first battle against Seven Moon Sect because Su Ming was the 3rd prince. Even though one Tao sect had retreated in that battle, Sun Mu's attitude had placed him above Seven Moon Sect, forcing Gu Tai and the others to accept the bet. From this alone, Sun Mu's pride could be seen. When his cold harumph spread through one Tao sect, he appeared in front of Su Ming. When he closed in, he did not use any extra divine abilities or arts. Instead, he pointed at Su Ming as if he wanted to destroy the world. A loud bang shot up, and when it reverberated in all directions, Sun Mu's expression changed. He retreated hundreds of feet, lifted his head, and stared at Su Ming. Su Ming lowered his right hand. Sun Mu's destructive finger had been neutralized when he swung his arm. When his right hand fell, his expression remained the same as ever as he stared at Sun Mu coldly. Sir, you look unfamiliar. I have never heard of a sect in ancient Zong that has a new great Tao Paragon. Since you're here and have declared that you want to destroy one Tao sect, why don't you tell me your identity? Sun Mu said coldly while staring at Su Ming, but his heart was trembling at that moment. In fact, he was slightly shocked because his attack just then was definitely not as simple as it seemed. It was one of his strongest divine abilities. It was a finger that caught others off guard, and it could even be used to fight against powerful great Tao Paragons. However, the black-robed young man before his eyes had neutralized his attack with just a swing of his arm. In fact, he did not even take a single step back. All of this was enough to tell him one thing. This person is a powerful great Tao paragon. Sun Mu's heart let out a thump. He knew clearly that there were differences in strength even among great Tao paragons. However, even though his heart was throbbing, he did not feel too much danger, because while the difference in strength between great Tao paragons was obvious, there had never been a case of great Tao paragons killing each other in ancient Zhong since ancient times. Great Tao paragon Sun Mu, have you forgotten about me? When Su Ming asked faintly, he took a step forward. When his foot landed, he lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pointed forward. Immediately, the air in front of Su Ming shattered with a bang. As layers of space tumbled about, the shattered pieces spread out and charged at Sun Mu. I'm a little blind. I really don't have any impression of you. As he spoke, Sun Mu lifted his right hand and seized the air downwards. When he lifted his hand, a layer of ripples spread out and crashed into Su Ming's incoming destruction. Booming sounds reverberated in the air again, and Sun Mu's expression changed again. He staggered hundreds of feet back again. You'll remember. As Su Ming spoke, he flew up and turned into a long arc that charged toward Sun Mu. The two of them crashed into each other, and booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The countless One Dao sect cultivators on the ground discovered to their shock that the great Dao paragon Sun Mu, who stood supreme in their hearts, was continuously moving back. He was moving back. Every single time he delivered a blow, he would be forced back. It was as if the black-robed young man's divine ability was so strong that he could not hope to fight against it. In Sun Mu's eyes, he had a presence about him that gave him an indomitable will. If he took a step back, then he would have to keep moving back. At that moment, it was no longer important who his opponent was. What was important was that Sun Mu noticed that he could not take the initiative. As the booming sounds echoed in the air, the speed at which he retreated increased. He was practically pushed back by Su Ming as he charged towards the huge statue. The shock brought by this scene was incredibly great to Sun Mu, because it was very rare for great Dao paragons to be unable to take the initiative in a battle. After all, as great Dao paragons, their levels of cultivation had already reached the pinnacle. Any one of their divine abilities could destroy the world, which was why there was only one possibility for them to be suppressed. This person isn't even using his full strength. He's moving with ease. This possibility shocked Sun Mu, and at the same time, he felt a little aggrieved because he was in One Dao sect. He could not execute divine abilities that were too powerful, or else, even without Su Ming attacking, One Dao sect would be destroyed by his own divine abilities. When he saw that he was about to be pushed towards the statue, a sigh traveled into his ears. Fellow Taoist, why must you do this? As the sigh traveled forth, an old man with crimson hair walked out from another statue in the distance. He took huge strides towards Su Ming, and with just one step, he closed in on him. When he swung his arm, a vast power that belonged to a great Dao paragon surged through the world with a bang and swept towards Su Ming. I am Qiyang. Fellow Taoist, if you want to stop now, we will not stop you. What happened today can be considered a misunderstanding. What do you think? As the booming sounds traveled forth, the old man with crimson hair spoke. When Sun Mu saw Qi Yang's divine ability sweeping through the world and turning into a windstorm that closed in on Su Ming, a glint appeared in Sun Mu's eyes. He turned around and no longer retreated. Instead, he charged towards Su Ming while forming a seal with his hands. The world in front of him distorted, and his body instantly split into hundreds of clones. Each of them executed different divine abilities and closed in on Su Ming. A cold sneer appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. He formed a seal with his right hand and formed a palm to fight against Sun Mu, then lifted his left hand to form a seal and threw a punch at the incoming windstorm. At the instant it landed, an astonishing power erupted from Su Ming's fist. Booming sounds reverberated in all directions, and the impact stirred up instantly tumbled outwards. All of One Dao sect was instantly enveloped in a deafening roar. Quite a number of the cultivators on the ground immediately bled from their eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Then, those with higher levels of cultivation quickly set up runes. The sect elders of one Dao sect also worked together to form a protective seal on the ground. As for the great sect elders who were Dao paragons of one Dao sect, there were 7 of them. When they flew out, they sat down cross-legged in the air. They only had one mission: to protect the disciples of one Dao sect. In the mid of the booming sounds, Qi Yang was in Su Ming's left hand, and Sun Mu was in his right. With his power alone, he fought against the attacks from 2 great Dao paragons. He did not move in midair, but Sun Mu's expression changed. He swiftly moved back, and booming sounds rang out nonstop. He was forced back 1,000 feet, and blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. When he lifted his head, he stared at Su Ming in shock and disbelief. By Su Ming's other side, old Qi Yang's expression also changed. He moved 1,000 feet back, and when he looked at Su Ming, a grave look appeared on his face. Just like Sun Mu, the 2 of them had not expected that the black-robed young man before them would be so strong. He was fighting against 2 of them alone, and not a single change could be detected on his face. Not only does he need to be a great Dao paragon to do this, he also needs a cultivation base that is unimaginably vast. He might be a Dao paragon, but his true level of cultivation is far more terrifying than his level of cultivation. At the instant Qi Yang and Sun Mu moved back, an old hand appeared in the air behind Su Ming without a single sound. It went straight for his back. Not only did that strike not make a single sound, it had also been executed at an incredibly precise time. It was the instant Su Ming forced Qi Yang and Sun Mu back. There was an incredibly strong destructive power in that palm, but it did not spread outwards. Just as it was about to touch Su Ming, the third eye at the center of Su Ming's brow shone, and the 8 overlapping great Dao paragons in his third eye immediately opened their eyes. A layer of black light instantly appeared in Su Ming's third eye. The screen of light instantly covered his entire body, causing the palm to land on it. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. Without any hesitation, Su Ming seized the air behind him with his right hand. With it, the air behind him distorted and shattered, and an old figure instantly appeared. It was a short old man dressed in a black robe. At that moment, there was an incredibly grave expression on his face. He took a few steps back and formed a 3-way rune with Qi Yang and Sun Mu to surround Su Ming. "You've finally come out," Su Ming said faintly while standing in the middle of the trio's encirclement. At that moment, the black screen surrounded Su Ming. When the trio saw it, Qi Yang and Sun Mu's expressions changed again, and disbelief appeared in their eyes. This is the first time I've seen a great Dao paragon whose level of cultivation surpasses his level of cultivation. He's not someone like us, whose level of cultivation and level of cultivation develop equally. The third prince's level of cultivation is so great that if it were not for the limitation of his level of cultivation, he might be able to bring forth the power of a 9th level Dao divinity. But I would like to ask, is Lin Dongdong well? Bai Lu asked slowly. There was a grave look on his face that had never appeared before on him. It was just as he said. At that moment, Su Ming was in that state. His level of cultivation came from the tree of Dao verification and had already surpassed his level of cultivation. It was like a bottle with a sufficient amount of water, but the opening of the bottle was only so big, which was why only a limited amount of his cultivation base could flow out. That was why he could fight against 3 people without being at a disadvantage. Because at that moment, Su Ming was the strongest among great Dao paragons. The light of an 8th level great Dao paragon is different from other people's when he is still a great Dao paragon. Only those who manage to sound 9 Dao spirit voices can do this. And right now, the only person who managed to sound 9 Dao spirit voices and has yet to become a great Dao paragon is the third prince who went missing when the dimension of the tree of Dao verification shattered 2,000-something years ago. Qi Yang's pupils shrank. He stared at Su Ming. Once he saw through Su Ming's identity, he knew that they would definitely fight to the death. "I didn't expect that after not seeing you for 2,000-something years, you would have already become a great Dao paragon," Sun Mu said slowly while staring at Su Ming. There was a slightly complicated look on his face. When the three of them spoke, the cultivators from one Tao sect below heard them. At that moment, their expressions changed. Some of them had experienced the destruction of the third dimension in the past. Even if they did not know about it, they had heard about the drastic change during the 2,000-something years ago. It was an incredibly devastating loss to all the sects and clans in ancient Zong, and it was also the destruction of the dimension that ended the fight for the throne beforehand. Yet right then, when they saw Su Ming again and heard the words of the three great Tao paragons in their sect, the shock in their hearts turned into a storm that roared. I can write during the annual meeting, but I will be in a hurry. Since I am about to ask for Mo Duo's help, I don't want to write carelessly. It's not that I can't write, but that I can't write like this. Please understand me. I also hope that I will ask Mo Duo to accompany you this year. Chapter 1600. Su Ming's expression remained calm. Once he came to one Tao sect, he did not intend to continue hiding his identity. Even if he was recognized, it did not matter to him. The cultivators in the place were already meaningless to him. It did not matter whether it was the three great Tao paragons or the other cultivators. They might be in the midst of Su Ming's and Xian Zhang's possession, but the possession was too real. It was so real that even if Su Ming knew everything, he still came to one Tao sect and fought in the world. He knew that everything might not exist, but he still persisted. In fact, Su Ming could have used the epiphany he had gained from Lin Dongdong's body. It was as if they were separated by an entire world. He could have made his existence transparent, and all divine abilities and arts would have been able to pass through him. But Su Ming did not choose to do so. He chose to attack. All of this was because of Seven Moon's sect, be it Lon Lon, Gu Tai, or Su Zhongfan, who had been very kind to Su Ming. They had appeared in Su Ming's life, but even if they had left into the distance, they still left behind different marks in his life. It was just like how fate decided who walked into a person's life, but it was up to the person to decide who could stay in it. Some people were destined to accompany a person for life, and some were destined to become marks. These marks were also divided into different depths. Those who were deep would never forget them, and those who were shallow were just passers-by. Fortunately, Lin Dongdong lives in his own world, Su Ming said faintly. An aloof glare shone in his eyes, and he took a step forward. He was an 8th-level Great Tao Paragon, but the depth of his level of cultivation had long since surpassed that, which was why he could be known as the strongest Great Tao Paragon in ancient Zong. He was also the strongest among those below the 9th level of Tao gods. It was a pity that not many people knew of his great reputation, but it was foreseeable that when Su Ming left one Tao sect, and the things that happened in one Tao sect were heard by others, Su Ming's fame would become the center of attention in ancient Zong. Almost at the same time, Su Ming took a step forward, Qiang, Sin Mu, and Bai Lu took a step forward at the same time. Their expressions were different, but the grave look in their eyes was the same. The more they understood Su Ming's level of cultivation, the greater the pressure they felt. He was the strongest Great Tao Paragon. The combat power that could erupt from the depths of his cultivation base was something that could last for a long period of time. It was something that Su Ming could always remain at the peak of his condition. Even if the same injury was inflicted on him, it would be greatly weakened, but the other three could not do it. The instant Su Ming's foot landed on the ground, Sun Mu lifted his right hand. Immediately, white light shone in his hand, and as it did so, a vast amount of white snow appeared before him. That snow rapidly gathered together and turned into a layer of ice crystals that instantly froze the entire area. Immediately after, Qiang formed a seal with his hands and exhaled a puff of air. It turned into a sun that exuded an endless amount of heat. It formed a power of ice and fire with Sun Mu's ice, and they charged at Su Ming while hiding the sky and earth. As for Bai Lu, he did not join in the attack. Instead, he swung his arms outwards, and his sleeves seemed to have lengthened by an innumerable margin. They enveloped the entire area as if they wanted to cover the sky and the moon. 2 of them were the main attackers, and 1 was the defense. This was what the 3 great Tao paragons of one Tao sect were best at. Su Ming's expression did not change much in the face of the trio's attacks. This was what he wanted to happen. It would save him the trouble of killing them one by one. He could kill all of them in one go. With a cold harumph, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed downwards without any hesitation. With it, the four great wills erupted from his body with a bang. As they did so, the presence Su Ming could bring out instantly increased exponentially, as if his realm had also increased slightly. Wills had always possessed the power to instantly increase a person's realm. This sort of increase did not mean that a person had gained an additional level of Tao divinity, but was a form of stimulation and release. It was just like when Su Ming was still a Tao spirit. He could fight against Tao paragons, albeit with great difficulty, and kill cultivators who had managed to rush out of the first or second level of Tao divinity realm. This was because he had the four great wills from Harmonious Morris Alba. At that moment, when the four great wills spread out, Su Ming's long purple hair moved without wind. As his robes fluttered, he pushed his right hand against the ground, and booming sounds surged into the sky. A crack in space that seemed to be able to cut apart the world instantly appeared around Su Ming. Once it connected with one another to form a ring, it spread outwards with loud rumbles. Wherever it went, the air shattered. One Tao sect's ground shuddered with a loud bang, and the entire ground sank hundreds of feet. As for the protective rune formed by the one Tao sect disciples, a gap immediately appeared. The sect elders coughed up blood, and quite a number of disciples screamed shrilly in pain. When the ground sank, they could not withstand the force, and their bodies and souls were destroyed. Their bodies and souls were destroyed. When the ground trembled, the expressions of Sun Mu and the other two changed drastically. When the crack in space around Su Ming swept towards them, it crashed into their divine abilities. They did not dodge, neither did they retreat. They simply fought against it head-on. Booming sounds instantly reverberated in the air. They were deafening, and Sun Mu's expression changed swiftly. He saw with his own eyes that his art of freezing 8 directions had been completely withstood by Su Ming's divine ability. At the same time, Sun Mu had also withstood Su Ming's art. At that moment, he coughed up blood. He sensed an indescribably vast power crash into his body, and he could not help but fall back. At the same time, Qiyang experienced the exact same thing. He personally saw the sun formed by his divine ability crash into Su Ming's divine ability, and the power of a great Tao paragon erupted from it. Qiyang also withstood Su Ming's divine ability. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his body fell back uncontrollably. The last was Bai Lu. He did not attack directly, but the seal and defense he formed to suppress the ripples of power from Su Ming crumbled at that moment. As he fell back, the 3 great Tao paragons from one Tao sect looked at Su Ming in shock, because Su Ming could be said to have withstood all of their divine abilities, but not a single change in his expression could be detected. The strongest great Tao paragon, the 4th most powerful person in ancient Zong. As expected, you are not someone we can fight against. When Bai Lu moved back, a dark look appeared on his face. He stared at Su Ming, and there was an ancient tone to his voice. We aren't your opponents, but even if you came for 7 Moons sect and can suppress the 3 of us alone, you can't kill us. This is a rule. It is a rule set by the Emperor of ancient Zong. Death cannot happen between great Tao paragons. This rule can only be broken by those below the level of Tao divinity realm. Bai Lu's ancient voice was calm. Sun Mu and Qiyang did not speak, but when they moved back, their gazes when they looked at Su Ming might have been solemn, but there was not a single hint of fear in their eyes when they faced a life and death crisis. 7 Moons sect brought trouble upon themselves. One Tao sect is already showing mercy by not destroying you. 3rd Prince, your level of cultivation might be high, but you can kill the other disciples of one Tao sect. Even if you kill all of us, it's fine. With the 3 of us, one Tao sect will exist for eternity. One Tao sect will inherit the kismet of the Emperor of ancient Zong. Before long, it will become even more prosperous, Qiyang said slowly while staring at Su Ming. The emperor of ancient Zhang's rule. Su Ming lowered his head and cast a glance at his right hand. When he lifted his head, a freezing glare shone in his eyes. He moved and appeared in front of Qi Yang. "I'd like to see just how unbreakable this rule is." As he spoke, Su Ming clenched his right fist. The four great wills gathered on him, and he threw a punch. Qi Yang's pupils shrank, but there was a cold sneer on his face. When he lifted his right hand, a sun appeared on his palm. It instantly turned into 9 and charged towards Su Ming. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, but Su Ming did not dodge. He simply allowed the 9 suns to close in on him. When they landed on him, he threw a punch with his right hand against Qi Yang's chest. Blood trickled out of the corners of Qi Yang's mouth, and he swiftly moved back. Su Ming's expression remained the same, but his killing intent grew stronger. In an instant, he chased after Qi Yang and Sun Mu. Booming sounds rang out nonstop, and Qi Yang continued retreating. In silence, Bai Lu and Sun Mu followed after him. Just as they were about to attack, Qi Yang's laughter echoed in one Dao sect. "Can you sense the rule? As long as you haven't become a 9th-level Dao god, you won't be able to kill great Dao paragons." Qi Yang continued retreating. His robes were covered in blood, but his life force was still exuberant. It showed no signs of extinguishing. Su Ming's eyes sparkled. He had indeed sensed a restraining power descending on him from the world, causing his divine abilities and arts to be weakened to the point that they could not kill Qi Yang when they landed on him. God, a berserker's transformation. The killing intent in Su Ming's eyes remained the same. When he spoke, his body let out a bang and instantly swelled up. His aura erupted from him again, and the God of berserker's transformation, the power of his 4 great wills, his cultivation base, and his power as a great Dao paragon, turned into the finger on Su Ming's right hand. With a power that could shake the sky and earth and destroy all lives, it charged towards the center of Qi Yang's brows while he laughed. Qi Yang did not dodge at all. He glared at Su Ming. The strength of that one finger had shocked him. In fact, during that instant, he had even felt death looming over him. However, a ferocious expression instantly appeared on his face, and a mocking look appeared on his face. He was mocking Su Ming's attempt to kill him as a joke. So what if it was his strongest finger? With the rule around, Qi Yang was bound to not die. A piercing whistle reverberated in the air. Su Ming's right index finger tore through space. At the instant it closed in on the center of Qi Yang's brows, a huge net appeared in front of Su Ming's finger. The net was practically transparent, and it blocked the space between Su Ming's finger and Qi Yang. Chapter 1601. The nearly transparent net shone with a piercing dark light at that moment. It shone intensely and stood between Su Ming and Qi Yang like a wall that was difficult to cross. Every single time it shone, it would weaken the power in Su Ming's finger. In just the span of a few breaths, the semi-transparent net had weakened nearly 8/10 of the power in Su Ming's finger. Derision appeared on Qi Yang's face. He was only a few inches away from Su Ming, but he felt as if they were separated by the sky and earth. Bai Lu and Sun Mu did not continue getting closer. Instead, they stared at Su Ming coldly. In their eyes, the third prince was indeed unprecedentedly strong. He was indeed the strongest great Dao paragon, and he was also the strongest person in ancient Zong besides the 9th-level Dao gods. But they were in ancient Zong, and the emperor of ancient Zhang's law existed. It did not allow great Dao paragons to kill each other, which was why there were not many life-threatening dangers between great Dao paragons. With the emperor of ancient Zhang's law, you won't be able to kill me, Qi Yang said faintly while standing still. In silence, a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. Is that so? The moment Su Ming said those words, he lifted his left hand, formed a seal, and pushed it against his right hand. At the same time, the third eye at the center of his brow opened. The 8 overlapping great Dao paragons in it instantly shone with a powerful black light. It instantly surrounded Su Ming's body and when it spread outwards, the 8 overlapping great Tao paragons manifested in his third eye. They fused with Su Ming's body, and at the moment they spread in all directions. The area around Su Ming seemed to be the center of the semi-transparent barrier, and the world around him turned dark. It was as if an incredibly clear division had formed between darkness and light. Almost at the instant the division was formed, Su Ming's power erupted from his body again. It even surpassed the power of his previous finger attack, causing Su Ming's right finger to look as if it wanted to pierce through the semi-transparent net. When he pointed at it, the net immediately bulged out, as if it was about to touch Qi Yang because of Su Ming's law. This change immediately caused Sun Mu and Bai Lu's expressions to change. It was the same for Qi Yang, but even as his pupils shrank, he did not move back. He could not allow himself to take even half a step back, because he firmly believed that with the rules set by the Emperor of Ancient Zhong around, the third prince did not have the right to kill him. But once he took a step back, he, who practiced the art of Kismet, would show distrust towards the Emperor of Ancient Zhang's law. Even if it was an instinctive action, it would affect his realm. This was something he understood, and Sun Mu and Bai Lu naturally understood as well, which was why their expressions only changed, but they still did not approach him. That battle might seem to be a battle between both sides, but in truth, it was a battle between Su Ming and the Emperor of Ancient Zhong. However, the black light shining from the 8 overlapping great Tao paragons on Su Ming's body caused Sun Mu and Bai Lu to feel slightly oppressed for some unknown reason. That black light, all those who have 9 Tao spirit voices in history will have different lights when they become great Tao paragons. This is completely different from us, who have yet to reach 9 Tao spirit voices in the past and become great Tao paragons. The light of great Tao paragons on the third prince's body is something we overlooked previously. Sun Mu, have you ever seen the black light of great Tao paragons? Bai Lu's pupils shrank. He stared at the black world where Su Ming was and suddenly asked. A solemn look had long since appeared in Sun Mu's eyes. The black light around Su Ming had also caused him to be slightly puzzled. It had not been too great previously, but at that moment, the feeling in his heart made him feel slightly uneasy. I've indeed never seen the black light before. I remember that great Tao paragon Fengshan's light is white. Why is there a black light of great Tao paragons on the third prince's body? Almost at the instant Sun Mu spoke, a shocking boom reverberated in the air between Su Ming and Qi Yang. As that sound spread out, Qi Yang's mocking laughter traveled into the air. How are you going to destroy me? There is a hint of provocation, mockery, and great confidence in that voice. You are indeed a little troublesome. When the protruding semi-transparent net was only an inch away from the center of Qi Yang's brows, Su Ming's calm voice came from the darkness where he was. But you're just a little troublesome. It won't be difficult for me to kill you. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he suddenly lifted his right foot and stomped on the air beneath him. With it, the world roared, and an illusory shadow appeared under Su Ming's feet. At first glance, it was impossible to tell what that illusory shadow was. It looked like a tree trunk, and it charged to the ground with loud, booming sounds. Once it landed, cracks immediately appeared on the ground, as if the tree trunk wanted to take root. The thing that looked like a tree trunk also grew above Su Ming, and in an instant, a huge object that looked like a huge tree appeared in the black world where Su Ming resided. When the tree stood tall, Sun Mu and Bai Lu's pupils shrank. Their expressions changed drastically, and disbelief appeared in their eyes. It surpassed the shock they felt when they noticed Su Ming was a cultivator. To them, the appearance of the tree was even more unbelievable than Su Ming becoming a great Tao paragon. This is the tree of Tao verification. This is the tree of Tao verification. How is this possible? The third dimension has been destroyed, and the tree of Tao verification is dead. This matter has already spread through the world in ancient Zhang's palace. So how could it appear on the third prince? His level of cultivation. Damn it, His level of cultivation is different from the other great Tao paragons because he obtained the power of the tree of Tao verification. At the instant Sun Mu and Bai Lu sucked in sharp breaths, the thing that looked like a huge tree appeared around Su Ming. It was the tree of Tao verification. The huge tree of Tao verification manifested around Su Ming and stood tall in the world. Its roots filled the depths of the shattered ground, as if they had long since pierced through it. The tree crown supported the sky, as if it wanted to replace the world. An indescribably great presence instantly descended on the entire world of one Tao sect. That presence was so strong that it contained a desolate air. There was also an ancient air of endless time that filled the area. Qi Yang stared at the huge tree of Tao verification that had suddenly appeared in front of him in a daze. At that moment, his mind was blank. The shock from the scene had thrown his thoughts into chaos. No matter what, he had never expected that he would be able to see the tree of Tao verification that could shock a person's heart in one Tao sect's world. The cultivation base in Su Ming's body was a serendipity given to him by Hao Hao. The power of that serendipity was a physical form. If he had not spent the 2,000 years gaining an epiphany about the tree of Tao verification changing the power of the world, Su Ming would not have been able to manifest the tree of Tao verification. After all, he only had a physical form, and his epiphany was its form. When he possessed both form and physical form, it was not surprising that the second tree of Tao verification in the entire vast expanse would appear on Su Ming's body. This was Su Ming's trump card, and it was also the reason why he chose to come to one Tao sect and even chose to destroy them. The moment the tree of Tao verification appeared in the black world where Su Ming was and the desolate air spread in all directions, Su Ming gathered his right index finger together again. Right before Sun Mu and Bai Lu's eyes, the tree of Tao verification in the black world started distorting, as if a power that surpassed that of a cultivator from the tree of Tao verification had gathered together and fused into Su Ming's right index finger. At the instant Su Ming's hand touched the semi-transparent net, the net protruded to its limit. Dark light shone intensely, and the world roared. The net in front of Qi Yang instantly became indistinct, and a cold and arrogant face could be vaguely seen. That face was the emperor of ancient Zhang's indestructible, while Su Ming had seen in the dimension of the tree of Tao verification. The battle to kill had clearly turned into a clash between the tree of Tao verification and the emperor of ancient Zhang. If the emperor of ancient Zhang gained the upper hand in the clash and the law continued, Su Ming would not be able to kill other great Tao paragons in ancient Zhang with just the power of a great Tao paragon. Similarly, if Su Ming's tree of Tao verification gained the upper hand and broke the law, then from then on, he would be a person who could ignore the law in ancient Zhang and kill great Tao paragons. Red appeared in Qi Yang's eyes as he glared at Su Ming. As a great Tao paragon, he believed firmly in his Tao of Kismet and the emperor of ancient Zhang's law. At that moment, he lifted his arms and pushed forward while letting out a low roar. His roar echoed in the air. The emperor of ancient Zhang's face had a mighty pressure in front of him. At the instant it crashed into the tree of Tao verification formed by Su Ming, the world roared. All the mountains in one Tao sect crumbled, and countless cultivators were reduced to ashes because they could not fight against it. The booming sounds grew stronger, and endless ripples appeared on the emperor of ancient Zhang's face. Su Ming's tree of Tao verification also became an illusion. At the instant the fight reached its most intense state, a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. His right hand instantly shot through the emperor of ancient Zhang's face formed by the law and landed at the center of Qi Yang's brow. The moment he touched it, Su Ming pulled his right hand back. The booming sounds in the world reached their peak, and the law crumbled. The emperor of ancient Zhang's face instantly contorted and shattered layer by layer. In the midst of the booming sounds, disbelief appeared in Qi Yang's eyes. A gap appeared at the center of his brow. No blood flowed out, but veins popped up on his face. As they squirmed, it was as if there were countless branches occupying his soul. Then, his eyes gradually became lifeless. Then, as if he had lost all life, his body fell to the ground. The sudden change caused Sun Mu and Bai Lu's hearts to roar, and a huge storm they had never seen before rose in their hearts. The law shattered before him. Black light. This black light that has never appeared before represents destruction. It means that he will be able to ignore the law of ancient Zong from now on. When I reach Guangzhou, I will upload some pictures at night. Chapter 1602. There was no life in Qi Yang's eyes. As a great Dao paragon of one Dao sect and a powerful warrior who had inherited the Dao of Kismet in ancient Zong, he had never thought that he would die one day. He followed the art of Kismet, and with how great one Dao sect's Kismet was, his own Kismet would definitely not be damaged. That was why while Qi Yang was concerned about Su Ming's appearance, he did not feel any life-threatening danger. He believed in Kismet and fate. He believed that there was no danger of him dying, and he also believed that Kismet and the laws set by the Emperor of ancient Zong could not be broken. That confidence ended the moment Su Ming's right finger broke the laws set by the Emperor of ancient Zong, shot through the semi-transparent net, and landed at the center of Qi Yang's brow. The finger finally broke through space and ignored the laws. It looked as if it had pierced through time and pressed against the center of Qi Yang's brow. At that instant, the branches from the tree of Dao verification sank deep into Qi Yang's body. In the blink of an eye, they spread out. When Su Ming lifted his right hand, Qi Yang's body looked the same as before, but in truth, his insides had been replaced by countless branches. When a great Dao paragon died, his body fell to the ground. His eyes were lifeless, as if there was a deep unwillingness to admit defeat hidden in them. However, in the depths of that unwillingness, there was also disbelief at the moment of his death. He was indeed in disbelief because since ancient times, he could be said to be the first great Dao paragon who was not killed by a 9th-level Dao god. This sort of death broke the laws of ancient Zong, and to Sun Mu and Bai Lu, it was the same as shaking ancient Zhang's Kismet. The shock caused Sun Mu and Bai Lu's hearts to roar when they saw Qi Yang fall. Their expressions changed drastically, and their pupils shrank. With a grave expression that was even stronger than before, they looked at Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was calm. When he turned around, his cold and fierce gaze landed on Bai Lu. "The next one is you." When he said those words, Bai Lu's heart let out a thump. A sense of death that he had never felt before instantly rose in his heart. Once that feeling appeared, Bai Lu moved back without any hesitation. He lifted his right hand and swung it forward, and a huge war drum immediately appeared in front of him. The war drum was purplish-black in color. The moment it appeared, it immediately exuded an ancient and shocking aura. A feeling that seemed to suppress the world immediately filled the one Dao sect's world. Almost at the same time the war drums appeared, Bai Lu's nervous voice immediately transmitted to Sun Mu. "Sun Mu, if the two of us don't go all out, then today will be our doom." At the instant he spoke, Bai Lu lifted his right hand and struck the huge war drum without any hesitation. Booming sounds instantly spread out with loud rumbles that shook the sky and earth. Blood instantly appeared on the faces of the one Dao sect disciples below. They sat down cross-legged, and no matter what sort of cultivator they were, blood capillaries appeared at the top of their skulls. This was Bai Lu's true divine ability. His arts could change endlessly, but the core of his art was still Kismet. However, when he executed it, he could circulate the origin Kismet of all the cultivators in one Dao sect. The red capillaries were like each person's fate. At that moment, when a large number of them filled the air, they gathered together in midair as Bai Lu formed a seal with his hands and pointed forward, turning into a blood-red figure. Waves of terrifying power spread out from that figure. It was like Bai Lu's clone, and he could control it at will. At that moment, the figure lifted its head, and a snowy light instantly shone to 100,000 feet. It turned into a blood-red long arc that charged towards Su Ming. At the same time, a hint of resolve appeared in Sun Mu's eyes. In truth, When Qiyang died, the sense of danger had already risen in his heart. At that moment, it could be said that it was a matter of life and death. If he and Bai Lu could not fight against Su Ming, then they would definitely end up the same as Qiyang. His years of cultivation would disappear, and he would no longer be a great Tao paragon. His life would also become dim and cease to exist in the world. This sort of thing was something he could not accept. The moment the blood-red figure charged towards Su Ming, Sun Mu sucked in a deep breath, lifted his right hand, and pushed it against his forehead. Practice for dozens of eons. Turn into 100 cycles of reincarnation. Activate the power of 30 cycles of reincarnation. As Sun Mu's voice echoed in the air, loud booming sounds came from his body. As his voice echoed in the air, 29 illusory figures appeared around him. There were men and women among them. Their appearances might be different, but to the Almighties, their souls were the same. They were all Sun Mu. This was the path Sun Mu had created over the countless years of cultivation based on his unique Tao of Kismet. It was the path of reincarnation. He had suppressed the 100 cycles of reincarnation time and time again, turning them into a seal that bound him. At that moment, he had broken 3/10 of it. He could not break the seal in an instant, or else his mind would fall into chaos. He could only break the seal gradually, and at that moment, he had broken 3/10 of it in one go. This was his limit for the time being. There were a total of 30 figures, including his body. At that moment, they filled the world, and the monstrous presence coming from Sun Mu's body shook the sky and earth at that moment. In fact, when he moved, it was as if 30 people had taken a step forward at the same time. They instantly charged towards Su Ming and surrounded him as if they had formed a rune. 30 cycles of reincarnation, I will look back on the past and see the vicissitudes of life. When Sun Mu spoke, it was as if 30 people had spoken at the same time. Their voices gathered together, but not only did they not give off the feeling of a wave of sound, they even sounded like murmurs. At that moment, when they echoed in the air, they formed a rune that looked like a vortex formed by the cycles of reincarnation. Inside the rune was Su Ming, along with the blood-red figure that was charging towards him like a blood-red long arc. In fact, as Bai Lu cast his divine abilities and arts beyond the reincarnation rune, 3 more red figures formed by the Kismet of one Tao sect, disciples formed by the Kismet, appeared and rushed towards Su Ming as if they could pierce through space. Su Ming watched all of this with a calm expression. His gaze was indifferent. When the reincarnation rune rotated and the blood-red figure closed in, Su Ming closed his eyes. At the same time, the land of berserkers appeared in his heart, along with the god of berserkers' song. When he opened his eyes, Su Ming opened his mouth and let out the god of berserkers' roar. Roar! It was indescribable. At that moment, an astonishing presence spread out from Su Ming's body, and ripples instantly tumbled about him. It was as if the dimension had crumbled, because his voice had become so strong that it had caused it to crumble. As the world crumbled, an illusory land of berserkers appeared behind Su Ming. The meeting started at 8:30 in the morning and ended at 5:30 in the evening. It lasted for an entire day. Then, when I returned to my room and was about to write, 2 sides, me too, and the others called me, and only then did I know that they had been waiting in the hall of the hotel for a long, long time. That's why I quickly told them my room number, and with them accompanying me, I wrote this chapter, but it's only 2,000 words. Please forgive me and understand. This is Qidian's annual meeting, and they actually remember who didn't come to the meeting, so didn't even have the chance to skip class. Chapter 16:03. The God of Berserkers' Roar. There was a god of berserkers in the land of berserkers. With one roar, the god of berserkers could shake the world, and the god of berserkers' roar that tumbled out of Su Ming's mouth at that moment was the strongest among all the gods of berserkers since ancient times. Because Su Ming was not just the 4th god of berserkers, he was also the strongest god of berserkers. At that moment, as the ripples spread out, the berserkers' world appeared behind Su Ming. It might be an illusion, but there was a thick presence of berserkers within it. During that instant, it looked as if it had descended an ancient zong and tumbled through the area. As Su Ming roared, a sonic boom formed. When it spread out with loud bangs, the blood-red figures formed by Bai Lu's divine ability were the first to be affected. Almost at the instant they closed in on Su Ming, they were struck by his god of berserkers' roar. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth. Not only did Su Ming's god of berserkers' roar manifest the illusory land of berserkers, there seemed to be an endless number of berserkers' souls roaring at the same time as their god of berserkers. The ground of one Dao sect crumbled. More cracks appeared on one of the three huge statues in the distance, and in the blink of an eye, it shattered with a loud bang, causing the three statues that had stood tall in one Dao sect for countless years to be reduced to two. As the statues crumbled, the ground shattered endlessly. Cracks appeared in the sky, and it was as if the apocalypse had arrived in one Dao sect's world. The blood-red figures looked as if they had been swept away by a violent gust of wind. They crumbled right before Su Ming, and soon after, the reincarnation rune that Sun Mu had gathered together over the course of 30 lives instantly disintegrated due to Su Ming's roar. From the distance, the space where Su Ming was looked as if it had turned into a gigantic black hole. However, that black hole did not exude a suction force, but an explosive impact. Almost at the same time it swept out in all directions, Su Ming took a swift step forward. With it, he walked out of the black hole that had formed with the booming sounds. When he took his second step, he appeared right in front of the white deer in the distance. At the instant Su Ming appeared, Bai Lu's expression changed. He lifted his right hand without hesitation and pushed his palm against the huge war drum. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and more blood capillaries instantly grew on the tops of the one Dao sect disciple skulls. Kismet of all lives Dao. Bai Lu's low roar seemed to contain some sort of law. Almost at the instant he spoke, the blood capillaries on the ground rose into the sky and appeared around Su Ming. When they swam about, they instantly connected with each other, and from the distance, they looked as if they had turned into a chain that surrounded Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was calm. He took his third step, and his body crashed into the blood capillaries. Booming sounds echoed in the air again, and the blood capillaries crumbled one by one. They could not stop Su Ming in the slightest, and when he took his third step, he appeared less than 100 feet away from the war drum where Bai Lu was. With 3 steps, he looked as if he was stepping on the sky. He was so fast that Sun Mu did not even have time to get close to him. The presence that appeared around Su Ming at that moment seemed to have replaced the sky and become the world's will and master. When he rose up, his presence shook the sky and earth. Su Ming did not say anything unnecessary. When he appeared 100 feet away from the war drum, where Bai Lu was, he lifted his right hand and pointed forward. With it, Su Ming's 4 great wills, all his cultivation base, and the endless power from the tree of Dao verification gathered on him. It was just like the finger he had used to kill Qi Yang. When he executed it again, a loud bang instantly rang out in Bai Lu's heart. His pupils shrank, and a powerful sense of life-threatening danger instantly enveloped his heart. All lives are Kismet Dao. Bai Lu's pupils shrank, and his hair whipped about without the presence of any wind. He formed an incantation gesture with both hands and then pushed them down onto the war drum. Immediately, the war drum began to spin in midair. When it stood upright, booming sounds rang out and ripples spread out. The ripples turned the color of blood, as if the entire world had turned into a sea of blood. At the same time, Bai Lu's voice echoed in the world again. All lives are sinful, and they should sink into the sea of blood. If they cannot wash away the sin of killing, they should be buried in the sea of blood for all eternity. They should sink into suffering and never be freed. A strange and enchanting light shone in Bai Lu's eyes. When he spoke, he clenched his right hand into a fist and punched the war drum. A large amount of red appeared in his eyes, as if he had descended into some sort of madness. Shatter! Almost at the instant he said those words, the war drum let out a loud bang and crumbled in the sky. As it crumbled to pieces, the entire world seemed to change drastically. The sky turned blood red, and the ground disappeared to turn into a sea of blood. The sea of blood was boundless, and as it tumbled about, it looked as if it wanted to devour the sky. The blood-red sky and the blood-red sea instantly replaced the world from before, trapping Su Ming within it as if he had been sealed. The sea of blood roared. Blood waves surged into the sky, and blood rain poured down from the sky. Besides the color of blood, there seemed to be no other color in the world. Soon after, as the sea of blood roared, a vortex appeared on its surface. As it spun rapidly, the entire sea rose up as if a large amount of water had been added to it, causing the sea to slowly approach the sky. A vast amount of power filled the world and turned into the vortex, the sky, and the sea of blood. All of them seemed to have gathered together at that moment and charged towards Su Ming to suppress him. At this moment, not only did a vortex appear on the surface of the sea, but it also appeared in the blood-colored sky. When the two vortexes appeared, they were like a dragon sucking in water. Shockingly, the sea and the sky connected, forming a tempest. The windstorm from the vortex roared in the world. As it tumbled about, it stirred up the sea of blood and sucked in an endless amount of blood-red rain. In just the span of a few breaths, it looked as if it had replaced the sky and the sea of blood. It became so vast that it charged towards Su Ming with a presence that could kill all lives. Su Ming stared at the blood-red sky that had been replaced by the sea of blood and the whirlwind formed by the connection between the sea of blood and the sky. His expression remained as calm as ever. He did not move back, but instead took a step forward. He lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky, then brought his left hand down to push down on the ground. He closed his eyes slightly, and his long hair moved without wind. At that moment, the whirlwind stirred up an endless amount of blood red and charged towards him with a loud bang. From the distance, the whirlwind was so big that it looked like an ancient giant, and Su Ming looked like an insignificant ant before it. Yet at the instant the whirlwind from the sea and sky crashed into Su Ming, as if it was about to devour him, Su Ming opened his eyes. As he did so, he brought his right hand down, lifted his left hand, and stretched it forward, as if he had entered the vast whirlwind right in front of Su Ming. A brilliant light shone in his eyes, and Su Ming's hands swiftly tore at the sides of the whirlwind, as if he was tearing apart the world, space, and fate. With it, booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The vast whirlwind of the sea and sky was completely torn apart in front of Su Ming. Loud booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the whirlwind was split into two. As the whirlwind was torn apart, the sky crumbled, and the sea of blood shattered. The entire world crumbled at that instant when Su Ming tore it apart with his hands. When the world was destroyed and the blood-red color retreated, Su Ming was still in one Dao sect. Around him were the fragments of the shattered war drum, as well as Bai Lu, who was coughing up blood and retreating. There was a dark look in his eyes. In truth, the blood-red world had been formed at the instant the war drum crumbled. At that moment, Su Ming took another step forward without any hesitation. His will to kill Bai Lu had not diminished in the slightest. With one move, he shot through the shattered war drum's fragments and appeared in front of Bai Lu. The finger from Su Ming's right hand closed in swiftly and charged towards the center of Bai Lu's brows, whose face was pale. One path of fortune. Bai Lu retreated swiftly and let out a shrill cry. At that moment, besides his own safety, he did not care about the lives of others. At the instant he said those words, Sun Mu, who had been rushing over from the distance, suddenly came to a halt. Grief appeared in his eyes, and he cast a swift glance at the ground beneath him. When he looked over, he saw that nearly a third of the one Dao sect disciples beneath him, tens of thousands of them, shuddered before their bodies instantly withered. Only an even thicker amount of blood capillaries appeared at the top of their skulls as their bodies withered. As they died, A gigantic blood-red statue immediately formed before the white deer. That statue stood between Su Ming and the white deer, as if it was a barrier that tried to stop Su Ming from pointing at it. "Break," Su Ming said flatly with a calm expression. At the instant his right index finger touched the blood-red statue, it crumbled, but at the instant it did so, another third of the One Tao sect disciples underneath withered. They let out shrill screams of pain, and a large amount of blood capillaries appeared on their bodies to form the second statue in front of Su Ming. "Bai Lu, what are you doing?" Blood-red light shone in Sun Mu's eyes when he looked at Bai Lu. "As long as I exist, then One Tao sect will exist. They died for me, and this is their kismet." Madness appeared on Bai Lu's face. As his voice echoed in the air, the remaining One Tao sect disciples underneath instantly withered, no matter what level of cultivation they had. Screams of pain shook the heavens, and the third statue formed in front of Su Ming. At the same time, with the two statues acting as barriers, Bai Lu's hair was a mess. With a low growl, his body turned into an illusory layer of fog that seemed to have no form. He charged at Su Ming. "You want to kill me, and today, either you die or I live." At the instant Bai Lu's voice echoed in the air, his cultivation base erupted from him. The entire world seemed to have frozen at that moment. Only the booming sounds continued echoing in the air. When the voice faded away and the picture no longer remained still, Su Ming's right hand had already touched the second statue. Once the second statue crumbled, he shot through the third statue, and, with one finger, he tapped the air. Fog gradually appeared in the spot where Su Ming had pointed. It slowly gathered into a figure, and it was naturally Bai Lu. There was an unwillingness to admit defeat in his eyes, and Su Ming's finger had shot through the center of his brow. Chapter 1604. I'm out of town. I have a fever of 38 degrees. My whole body is weak. I've been lying for a day. I'll take leave today. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1605. White deer died, and, just like Qiyang, his Tao and spirit dispersed. From then on, he no longer existed in the world of mortals. As the sparkle in white deer's eyes faded away, one of the two statues left in One Tao sect crumbled with a bang. As the statue crumbled, the entire world trembled. Most of the One Tao sect disciples beneath it also crumbled while the ground trembled. Their souls and kismet had been sucked out by Bai Lu. Right then, only their bodies remained, and, as the ground trembled, they were reduced to ashes. At that moment, Sun Mu was the only one left in One Tao sect. Sun Mu stood alone in midair and watched everything around him quietly. Grief appeared on his face, along with a wave of resignation that came from the bottom of his heart. Su Ming's strength and his actions of killing Qiyang and Bai Lu in succession had already revealed his status as the strongest below the 9th level of Tao God Realm. He was so strong that he could ignore the rules of the Emperor. His actions of killing great Tao paragons in the same realm has brought only anguish to Sun Mu. One Tao sect has encountered this disaster. This is their destiny. If that's the case, then what's the point of me living alone? When Sun Mu looked at Su Ming in midair, he laughed forlornly. He lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and pushed it at the center of his brows. Immediately, his body roared. The air around him distorted, and nearly 100 men and women appeared. They were his 100 incarnations. This time, Sun Mu released all of them. When they surrounded him, they were like clones. When Su Ming looked at them, he saw that each of them had a different expression on their faces. The reincarnated figures around Sun Mu turned from blurry to clear, and from clear to lifelike. When they surrounded the area, great sorrow appeared in Sun Mu's eyes, and he turned into a long arc that charged towards Su Ming. The 100 figures beside him also turned into long arcs and charged towards Su Ming at the same time. There was a will to die in Sun Mu. He was a great Tao paragon of One Tao sect, and if One Tao sect was already in such a state, then what was the point of him living alone? He did not want to live alone, and he also knew that Su Ming would not spare him. If that was the case, then he might as well die with his sect. Even if his body and soul were destroyed, even if his Tao and spirit disappeared, he would still have his sect by his side in the netherworld. With the desire to die, the long arc that was Sun Mu charged towards Su Ming with the 100 shadows beside him. When he closed in on Su Ming, his expression was calm. He slowly lifted his right hand, and waves of black light spread out from his third eye. They gathered on his right hand, causing it to slowly shine with a piercing dark light. Within it was a terrifying power that could shatter the laws of the Emperor. Su Ming could tell that Sun Mu wanted to die. Since he had already made his choice, Su Ming would fulfill his wish. There were very few things that could change his mind about destroying one Tao sect. But at the instant he lifted his right hand, Su Ming's eyes suddenly focused, and his gaze landed on one of the 100 reincarnated figures around Sun Mu. It was a man who was as beautiful as a flower. He was handsome, but filled with unswerving determination. It was second elder brother. There were very few people who could change Su Ming's heart to destroy one Tao sect, and second senior brother was one of them. Almost at the instant Su Ming saw one of Sun Mu's 100 reincarnated figures, nostalgia rose in his heart. All the memories related to second senior brother flashed in Su Ming's head at that moment. Su Ming fell silent. He stared at second senior brother's figure, and his gaze eventually fell on Sun Mu. As he looked at him, Sun Mu and second senior brother seemed to have fused into one person in his eyes. He sighed softly, and the piercing dark light on his right hand faded away. When he lowered his right hand and dispelled his divine ability, he turned around and walked into the distance. With a loud bang, the long arc that was Sun Mu and the 100 reincarnated figures landed at the spot where Su Ming had been previously. They shook the air and the dimension, causing ripples to spread out. Sun Mu lifted his head swiftly and stared at Su Ming, who was gradually walking into the distance. "Why?" Sun Mu cried out. His voice was shrill and forlorn. He could not find a reason why Su Ming would not attack him. Before he came, he had already said that he wanted to destroy one Tao sect, and as one of the 3 great Tao paragons of one Tao sect, it was clear that he had to be killed. Yet right then, Su Ming had already lifted his right hand and gathered his divine ability together. But for some unknown reason, when he stared at Sun Mu, he sighed and gave up on attacking. Instead, he chose to leave. Sun Mu could not understand it. "Why?" Sun Mu's voice traveled into the air again. This time, he was not the only one who spoke. Instead, all of his 100 reincarnated figures spoke at the same time. Their voices turned into a wave of sound that spread in all directions and reached Su Ming's ears. Su Ming could ignore Sun Mu's voice and act as if he did not hear it. But at that moment, he heard his second senior brother's voice in the wave of sound. When it echoed in the air, Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt. "Because you are a past I do not want to let go of." Su Ming's voice echoed in the air with melancholy and an ancient air to it. When it spread out in all directions, he gradually left into the distance until he disappeared from one Tao sect's world. Sun Mu stood in a daze. Su Ming's voice seemed to still echo in his ears, but the meaning behind his words caused him to be at a loss. He should not have understood it, but once he heard Su Ming's words, he seemed to have understood something. However, when he wanted to investigate it carefully, he found nothing. This feeling caused him to fall silent in his daze. In the quiet world of one Tao sect, he slowly sat down cross-legged on the only statue that existed. When Sun Mu sat down on the statue's head, he closed his eyes. Su Ming left one Tao sect and appeared in the broken temple. He did not turn his head around to look at the statue behind him. With a calm expression, he walked forward. When he walked out of the temple, a loud bang shot up, and the temple behind him turned into ashes, as if millions of years had passed in an instant. It collapsed and disappeared into the air. The connection between one Tao sect and ancient Zong disappeared at that moment. There was only one reason for its disappearance. One Tao sect no longer had enough kismet to maintain the temple's existence. Almost at the instant the temple disappeared, All the cultivators who were great Tao paragons in ancient Zhong sensed something in their hearts. Several days later, when a great Tao paragon who had sensed it personally arrived outside One Tao sect and saw that the temple was no longer around, the news of One Tao sect being destroyed immediately spread through ancient Zhong. The shock of this matter was a great blow to all the sects and clans in ancient Zhong. One Tao sect was practically the strongest sect among the 7 sects and 13 clans. If Azura clan did not have Tao divinity Tianxiu Luo, they would not have been able to fight against One Tao sect. But even with Tianxiu Luo around, One Tao sect still lived up to its name as the strongest sect. After all, Tianxiu Luo's existence was only to intimidate others. As a Tao divinity, Tianxiu Luo had a transcendent status, so no one in Azura clan dared to provoke them. But if they were talking about being arrogant and domineering, One Tao sect was still the strongest. Yet now, someone had destroyed One Tao sect's kismet. No one knew what was going on in the sect, but the disappearance of its kismet was enough to make it certain that One Tao sect had suffered a great disaster. Who destroyed One Tao sect's kismet? And what was the situation in One Tao sect right then? As the news of One Tao sect's kismet being destroyed spread through ancient Zhong, it rose in the hearts of all the powerful warriors in the sects and clans. In everyone's eyes, only the 3 9th-level Tao divinities could do this. But right then, all the sects and clans knew that the 3 9th-level Tao divinities had been sitting in ancient Zhang's imperial city for 2,000 years. It was an incredibly rare sight for them to appear together. They meditated for 2,000 years, and they did not take even half a step out of the imperial city. Because of that, the people who destroyed One Tao sect were not the 3 9th-level Tao divinities. Then who was the cultivator who destroyed One Tao sect? This question echoed in the air even more intensely. The 14 great Tao paragons from the other sects and clans gathered beside the disappearing temple of One Tao sect and executed a divine ability known as Abyss Inquiry. This divine ability required more than a dozen great Tao paragons to execute it at the same time. They had to ask the people who died in One Tao sect and the souls who had disappeared, who was the one who destroyed One Tao sect's kismet. It could be said that all the sects and clans in ancient Zhong paid great attention to the execution of this art, except for Seven Moons sect. Once Dao Han of Seven Moons sect heard about what happened to One Tao sect, he immediately understood that all of it was related to Su Ming. Under the attention of many sects and clans, the dozen-something great Tao paragons executed their art. After several days, they surrounded the area around One Tao sect's temple, which had been reduced to ashes, and summoned the first dead soul. It was Qi Yang. The appearance of Qi Yang's soul immediately shocked the dozen-something great Tao paragons. They might have known a long time ago that One Tao sect's kismet had scattered, but they had never expected that one of One Tao sect's great Tao paragons would die. In their eyes, the possibility of Qi Yang and the others being sealed was higher. Yet when Qi Yang's soul appeared, the hearts of the dozen-something great Tao paragons instantly let out a loud thump. The third prince. He broke the emperor's law. He has the power to kill great Tao paragons. Qi Yang's soul let out a shrill roar. As it did so, it gradually became indistinct and disappeared from the people's eyes. The area was silent. The appearance of the third prince's name immediately made all the sects and clans remember everything that had happened 2,000-something years ago. Through Qi Yang's soul's words, they immediately understood that the third prince had returned. He had become a great Tao paragon, and he had the power to kill great Tao paragons in the same realm as him, because he could break the emperor's law, and because Qi Yang was dead. Almost at the same time, all the sects and clans in ancient Zhong were in an uproar because of the third prince's name. Su Ming was dressed in a black robe. His purple hair danced elegantly in the wind as he walked towards the royal capital. It's been 3,000 years. He still remembered that his master, who looked exactly the same as Tian Xiezi, had once told him that when he came to the city gate 3,000 years later, he would be waiting for him there to answer his final questions. His throat was in great pain, and his limbs were weak. His entire body was sore. The previous day, he had lain in the hotel for an entire day and night, and he had been sweating nonstop. On that day, he no longer had a fever, but his limbs were still weak and sore. He had adjusted the temperature of the room to the highest, but he still felt cold. It was terrible. Chapter 1606. It was a setting sun. The afterglow of the setting sun scattered on the ground, and at some unknown point in time, snowflakes floated down from the sky. They covered the ground and the world in Su Ming's eyes, but they could not cover the capital in that world. Nor could it hide the fact that there was a figure wearing a straw cape and a bamboo hat standing outside the city gates. That figure held a wooden staff in his hand and stood silently outside the city gates, as if he had been waiting for thousands of years. Su Ming looked over and stared at the figure outside the city gate. He felt as if he had returned to 3,000 years ago, when he had just woken up in this world and saw Tian Xiezi. In the blink of an eye, 3,000 years had passed. Su Ming's level of cultivation had become different, and he had gained quite a large amount of ancient air. Some of the scenes in his memories were still clear, but some had become indistinct for some unknown reason. It was just like how the world of wind and snow could make a person's vision become blurry, and they could not see too far into the distance. But sometimes, being able to see what was right in front of them, even if it was not very far away, was a form of happiness. If they looked too far away, perhaps their happiness would be far away until they could no longer see it. Su Ming walked through the wind and snow. With the snow falling on his face, he arrived outside the city gate and stood in front of the figure dressed in a straw cape and a bamboo hat. "You're here." The figure in the straw cape slowly lifted his head, revealing a face Su Ming was familiar with under the bamboo hat. It was Tian Xiezi. There was a kind look on his face. It was the kind look of a senior looking at a junior. It was a look of care and love that came from the bottom of his heart. It was as if Su Ming's growth had reached the sky in his eyes, but in his heart, Su Ming was still a child. Even if he no longer needed his protection, he still wanted to protect him. "Master!" Su Ming stared at Tian Xiezi in the straw cape, then wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply. His voice was slightly hoarse. His master had accompanied Su Ming his entire life since the 9th summit in the land of berserkers, and he had been with ancient Zong until then. 3,000 years ago, I told you that I would wait for you here and answer your final question. Have you thought about your final question? Tian Xiezi, who was dressed in the straw cape, looked at Su Ming kindly. When he spoke slowly, a profound look appeared in his eyes, as if there was an indescribable wisdom contained within them. Su Ming was silent. This was his final question. 3,000 years ago, he wanted to know just what sort of place this world was. Was it the world in Xian Zhang's body, or was it Xian Zhang's memories that appeared when he possessed Xianzong? However, this question gradually changed as Su Ming continued down the path, and it turned into a desire to know how he could leave this world. However, as time passed, Su Ming's doubts changed again. He wanted to know whether the familiar faces he met in this world were truly not connected to the people in his memories. Questions rose in Su Ming's mind again and again during the 3,000 years. When he was in Hao Hao's world, his questions changed again to what was his Tao. He did not understand what his Tao was. He wanted to obtain an answer from Tian Xiezi, but when Su Ming thought about it seriously after hearing Tian Xiezi's words, he suddenly realized that this was not the answer he wanted, because he did not know what his final question was. There was only silence. "Is it because you can't remember?" Tian Xiezi, who was dressed in a straw cape, stared at Su Ming in the snow and wind outside the city gate. A hint of pain appeared on his face, as if Su Ming's current appearance made him slightly sad. Su Ming was silent. He stared at the snow and wind, and after a long, long time, he sighed softly. "I indeed can't remember. Perhaps I have too many questions, but if it's the final question, I can't find it. It's already lost in the passage of time. I want to search for it, but it's separated by space. I can't touch it, and I can't search for it either, Su Ming mumbled. Tian Xiezi was silent for a moment before he said slowly, "Since you can't find it, then don't search for it. It's a blessing that you don't have the final question. Master, please choose one for me." Su Ming lifted his head and stared at the snow and wind in the sky. He stared at the city gate behind Tian Xiezi. After a long while, he said softly, "Must I be persistent? Must you be so persistent?" Tian Xiezi looked at Su Ming, and his expression became even more profound. "That's a method. It's bound to be filled with twists and turns and desolation. Since I'm already walking down this path, why shouldn't I be persistent?" Su Ming asked softly. Tian Xiezi fell silent. The master and disciple remained silent for a long, long time in the snow and wind. When the sun set and snow covered the ground and piled up into a thick layer, their hair was also covered in white snow, as if their hair had already turned white. It made the ancient air around them become even stronger, and the feeling of time became even heavier. "Stop. Don't continue walking down this path. Stop here. When you turn your head back, you will see all the faces in your memories. They will appear behind you. They will wait for you. Turn your head back to the mortal world and become a carefree immortal. Don't bother about what's real and what's fake. Don't cling to your path. Sometimes the happiness you don't choose might be true happiness." After a long while, Tian Xiezi's voice reverberated in the air and fell into Su Ming's ears in the snow and wind, causing him to slowly turn his head around in silence. As if he was turning his head back to the mortal world, he looked behind him. When he turned his head around, he saw Bai Ling in the snow and wind behind him. She was dressed in a mink fur robe, and with a wild beauty, she was staring at him with a smile. Beside her was Yuxian. She was smiling sweetly, just as she always did. Her determined gaze could melt Su Ming's heart, and as Su Ming stared at her, he felt as if he could hear the words "Big Brother" echoing in his ears once again. There was also Tsanglan. With her elegance and gentleness, she looked as if she had been waiting for Su Ming for countless years. But no matter how long she had to wait, she would continue waiting. As she waited, she gradually turned Su Ming into the only person in her heart. Sui was still the same. The elder smiled. There was a kind look on his ancient face at that moment, as if he was waiting for Su Ming to make a choice. Once he chose to turn his head back, he would speak. "Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, Huzi." All the faces were there. When Su Ming turned his head around, all of them were reflected in his eyes, but the bald crane was not there. If you continue walking down this path, they might not necessarily be revived, but if you don't continue, then when you turn your head back to the mortal world and become a carefree immortal, they will be with you. Su Ming, you are my disciple. I don't want you to be so tired. This is the most suitable choice for you, Tian Xiezi said hoarsely. He stared at Su Ming's back when he turned his head around, and a pained look appeared on his face. It was just as he said. The twists and turns and desolation on this path made him unwilling to continue walking down Su Ming's path until he reached a point where no matter how many cycles of reincarnation there would be, there would always be one person missing. 3,000 years ago, your Caodao has already bid farewell to the past. Now, when you turn your head back to the mortal world, why do you still have to be so stubborn? Why do you have to search for what is real and what is fake? Look at Di Tian, look at Lei Chun. Don't make yourself forever disappear from those cycles of reincarnation. Tian Xie sighed softly. There was anguish in his sigh, along with a hint of pity in his pained heart. He saw Su Ming's entire life. It was full of twists and turns and desolation, just like how he sought happiness. Su Ming fell silent. When he turned his head back, everything he saw was filled with warmth. The faces in his memories caused an urge to appear in Su Ming's heart. He wanted to nod and stop walking down this path. He wanted to stay here and become a carefree immortal. He wanted to ignore what was real and what was fake and search for happiness, even if it was just an illusion. There are plenty of people here, and there are plenty of familiar faces, but the bald crane isn't here. The familiar faces here are all the faces in my memories. They live in my memories. Are they still them? They will no longer have any thoughts about the future, because all their thoughts will be given to them by my memories. In their current state, they will have no souls, Su Ming mumbled. Su Ming mumbled. Tears gradually fell from his eyes. The faces before him caused his heart to clench in pain. He slowly turned his head around, and at the instant he did so, the snow and the wind turned black. The world behind him turned black, and even the city in front of him and the world in front of him turned into night. The descent of night seemed to represent Su Ming's choice. It turned into a darkness that could not be died away. It was just like his path. When he turned his head back to the mortal world, he did not choose to become a carefree immortal. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that the path under his feet was not a path, and neither was it Su Ming's Tao. It was an attitude that was destined to be cold but persistent. He wanted to live for himself, for the truth, and also for others. For this path, for the faces in his memories to have souls, so that there would not be a lack of bald cranes in the cycles of life and death, so that all the faces would not just smile, but also have intelligence, as if they were masters of fate, lives, and death. Su Ming chose to not become a carefree immortal after he turned his head back, but to continue walking down this path. Even if there would be one person missing after many cycles of life and death, he would still seek to become a demon on the tortuous and desolate path, and the persistent but cold path. Seeking to become a demon was a method. It was destined to be tortuous and desolate. Seeking to become a demon was an attitude. It was destined to be cold but persistent. Seeking to become a demon was a life of darkness. In the dark, Su Ming stared at Tian Xiezi, who was dressed in a straw cape and wore a bamboo hat. In silence, he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards Tian Xiezi. When he got up, Su Ming did not speak. He walked past Tian Xiezi and walked towards the city in the dark. Tian Xiezi stared at Su Ming's back in the dark and mumbled softly. Who enters your life is decided by fate, and who stays in your life is decided by you. Since you can't forget them, then you might as well not forget them. Even if everything turns to nothing, everything in the past is worth having. Su Ming, my disciple, is this your choice? You will turn your head back to the mortal world and not become an immortal, all for the sake of the face that represents all the memories, the true self, and the persistent, master of fate, lives, and death. I'll resume updating tomorrow. I'm finally going to get through it. With this body, even if I catch a bad cold, I'll be able to recover in 3 days. Chapter 16:07. Damn it. I don't even know what I'm complaining about. I was supposed to be able to get home on Monday, but I ended up with a cold. A very bad cold. I could only stay in another city by myself during the transfer. I bought some medicine and stayed in a hotel for 2 days. Today, I finally recovered quite a bit. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning to catch a flight at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was prepared to get home as soon as possible and start writing my story. I was on update as usual today, but damn it, the flight was delayed again and again. That's it. I'm writing at the airport. I hashtag, sent a picture of my ears in the airport. I'm going to reply later. You can see the rainbow glow surrounding me as if I'm about to become an immortal. Hashtag. Chapter 16:08. Fate would decide who could walk into a person's life, but fate could not decide who could stay in a person's life. The only ones who could decide it were themselves. Since he could not forget it, then he might as well not forget it, even if everything became empty, even if everything turned into the afterglow of dusk and disappeared without a trace when night descended. Su Ming walked past Tian Xiezi, who was dressed in a straw cape and wore a bamboo hat. It was as if his entire life had moved from winter to spring, or perhaps it was another season. When he walked to the city gate, there was no longer any wind or snow behind him. When he walked through the city gate, Tian Xiezi sighed softly behind him. There was pity in that sigh, along with a complicated look as well as pride. It was pity for Su Ming's life. It was a complicated choice he had made, but it was also a path he was proud of. The Sai gradually left into the distance. When he walked out of the city gate and stepped into ancient Zhang's capital, the Sai behind him disappeared, as if it had been separated from him for countless years. Su Ming did not turn his head back. He just walked and walked in the capital. He did not need to know the direction, because at the instant he stepped through the city gate, he had already seen the direction. He saw the 3 towering towers in the distance. There was a figure sitting cross-legged at the top of each of the 3 towers. The person sitting at the top of the tower at the center was dressed in an emperor's robe. There was a thick presence of kismet about him, and it was as if the entire world, the ancient world, and all of ancient Zong were centered around him. It was as if, wherever he was, ancient Zong would no longer be known as ancient Zong. He was the king of ancient Zong. He was the sovereign of ancient Zong who had all of ancient Zhang's kismet gathered on him. Sitting at the top of what could be considered the 3rd tower was a middle-aged man. He looked incredibly beautiful, and there was a strange and enchanting air about him. That feeling was incredibly strong, and it turned into a presence that surrounded him. When Su Ming looked at him, he felt as if he was the most disharmonious person in the world. It was as if not even the chi flow of this person could fuse with him. He did not accept heaven and earth, nor did he accept the heavens. He did not accept all living things. That was because heaven and earth, the heavens, and all living things could not surpass him. That was because he was the one and only creator of the vast expanse. He could create the heavens and the earth. So how could he merge with the heavens and the earth? He could create the heavens. So how could he lower himself to merge with the heavens? He could create and change all living things. So how could he merge with them? If he had to merge, it should be the heavens and the earth, the heavens and all living things trying to merge with him. He was Azura. The path he condensed was the supreme and tyrannical Azura. The one at the center of the 3 towers was the sovereign, the 3rd was Tianxiu Luo, and the figure sitting cross-legged on the 1st tower was staring at Su Ming at that moment. There was an ancient air to that figure, along with the flow of time. It was as if he had been sitting there for a long time and had been waiting for Su Ming for a very long time. That figure did not have all of ancient Zhang's kismet gathered on him like the sovereign, and neither did he have Tianxiu Luo's domineering air of saying that he was the creator of the world. However, there was an indescribable presence about the figure that seemed to be able to distinguish what was real and what was fake, see through all illusions, and even see through the passage of time. That presence seemed to be the limit of wisdom. It was the end of a life that could understand, and it was also a Tao that seemed to be able to understand kismet, domineering ways, and everything about all living things. On that path, he could never see illusions. He could only see the truth he wanted to see. It was Guhong. Guhong, one of the 3 9th-level Tao gods in ancient Zong, or rather, the 3 of them were no longer 9th-level Tao gods. Perhaps they had already severed their own Taos and achieved boundless Tao that belonged to them. Tianxiu Luo had already severed his own Tao and reached boundless Tao. Gu Di had clearly also severed his kismet during the 2,000 years to reach boundless Tao. As for Gu Hong, the fact that he could sit cross-legged on the tower meant that he had also severed his own choice. He had not severed his own Tao in a true sense, but a form of resolution, a choice. That choice could not be turned back, and there was no turning back. If it was right, it was right, and if it was wrong, it was wrong. There were 2 paths. Perhaps one was right, and perhaps both were wrong. Once he made his choice, it would be for the rest of his life. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt for a moment. He stood on the street of ancient Zhang's capital and watched the people who moved past him in a hurry. Su Ming did not look at them, because he knew that even if he looked at them, he would not be able to remember their faces, which was why he chose not to look at them. The only person he looked at was Lone Swan, who was on the 1st tower. The old man was also looking at Su Ming, and a smile gradually appeared on his lips. "Boy, I've already waited for you for 2,000 years. The old man's voice had a hint of laughter in it. At that instant, it came from the tower and echoed through the entire capital. His voice also reached Su Ming's ears. It was a simple sentence, but there was warmth contained within it. Su Ming could sense it deeply, causing warmth to appear in his heart at that moment. That care was very real, so real that Su Ming would remember it for the rest of his life. Disciple Su Ming greets master. Su Ming stared at the figure on the tower in the distance, then wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply towards him. There was an ancient tone to his laughter, but it was mostly filled with joy. When he spoke again, the old man on the tower had already disappeared. When he reappeared, he was right in front of Su Ming. He still looked the same, but there was less strangeness about him and more age about him. At that moment, when he looked at Su Ming, joy appeared in his eyes. Once he scrutinized Su Ming, his laughter became even louder. Good, good, good. In the end, you didn't make me wait for 2,000 years in vain. I promised you in the past that I would let you personally witness the fight between me and those two old coots. This is my promise, and since it's a promise, I will definitely keep it. Forget 2,000 years, even if it's 20,000 years, 200,000 years, or even 20,000 eons, I will continue waiting. There were originally a lot of wrinkles on the old man's face, but as he laughed, some of them seemed to have disappeared. Let's go. As the old man laughed happily, he grabbed Su Ming's right hand, and with a single move, he appeared on the tower where he had been previously. There was originally only one seat at the top of the tower because Su Ming could clearly see that there was only one person sitting cross-legged and meditating in the second and third towers. However, there were two spots for people to sit cross-legged on the first tower. The other spot had clearly been formed by the old man over the course of 2,000 years. This action was very simple and looked very normal, but it was precisely this normal seat that caused Su Ming's heart to tremble at the instant he saw it. The seat contained the old man's love for Su Ming and all his kindness towards his disciple. There was no need for anything else in return. It was just a form of love and a testimony to his Tao. It was just like the fate between him and Su Ming, and the Tao they chose was a similar path. You two old coots, we can fight now. My disciple is back, ha. The old man stood there and laughed loudly. His voice was familiar to Su Ming, but it was so friendly that it was unreliable. Almost at the instant he said those words, Tianxiu Luo's eyes flew open, and a merciless glare appeared in them. His appearance changed, and his presence became different from before. The merciless look in his eyes caused him to look like he was no longer a cultivator. For cultivator, you would rather use the method of sealing yourself and avoid fighting for 2,000 years. Guhong, your Tao is still as hateful as ever. My disciple is mine, not yours. Of course I have to care about him. If I don't care about him, who would care about him? Who would care about that old coot who plays with the art of Kismet? The old man rolled his eyes, let out a cold harumph, and immediately started cursing. As he spoke, the sovereign of ancient Zong, who was sitting on the tower at the center, slowly opened his eyes. When he looked at Su Ming, there was not much change in his emotions on his face. Only a sigh echoed in the air. Xian air. Su Ming stared at the sovereign of ancient Zong. After remaining silent for a moment, he said slowly, My name is Su Ming. The sovereign of ancient Zong, who was sitting on the tower at the center, fell silent. After some time, his deep voice traveled forth languidly, as if it was echoing in the entire world. Do you still remember the story of the wanderer who left his home? Su Ming's eyes focused. He cast the sovereign a few scrutinizing glances, and he remembered the old man he saw in a noodle stall 3,000 years ago. Why continue being lost? I'm not surprised that you were chosen by Gu Hong as his disciple, because your Tao is similar to his. However, Gu Hong has already severed his choice. Are you still not going to wake up? Wake up, my dear Xinair. When you wake up, you will be the emperor of ancient Zong. When you wake up, all of ancient Zhang's Kismet will gather on you. You will be the only scion of my Kismet and Lone Swan Tao. You will become the true, boundless Tao realm. The sovereign of ancient Zong slowly stood up from the tower. When he stared at Su Ming, his voice was like the sound of the world. As it echoed in the air, the hearts of all the lives in the capital trembled, and they instantly knelt down to worship him. They were not the only ones. The sects and clans in all directions and all the cultivators in ancient Zong knelt down to worship him, as if they were prostrating themselves to worship ancient Zhang's kismet. The sky changed, as if it had turned into chaos. Fog rose on the ground, as if it had turned into a vast expanse. During that instant, everything seemed to be centered around that person. "This is his boundless Tao realm, not mine," the old man said slowly while standing beside Su Ming and watching the changes in the world. "Life has its limits, but knowledge has no limits. How many cycles of life and death can there be no limits to boundless Tao? The earth has its limits, but the sky has no limits. How many thoughts of life and death can there be no limits? I'll tell you about my bitter experience today. I had just recovered from a major illness and got up at around 6 in the morning to catch the plane that would take off at 7:30. I reached the airport before 7, and once I finished all the check-in procedures, I was suddenly told that the plane would be delayed and would take off at 10. At that time, I felt gloomy. If I had known this would happen, I would have just slept longer. So be it. I found a seat, leaned against it, and dozed off. I set an alarm on my phone, and when I woke up at 9:30, I was full of energy, ready to board the plane. But at that moment, the airport told me that the departure time had been changed to 11. I started cursing in my heart, so I went to a coffee shop and started writing my story, but the area around me was very chaotic, and my writing was slow. When I finally reached 11, I suddenly received bad news. The flight was canceled, and the reason was because of heavy snow in Yun River. The airport was closed, and I spent every single day. Not only was it canceled for one day, but tomorrow's flight was also canceled. If I wanted to go home, I could only go home the day after tomorrow. But I was in a hurry, so I quickly refunded the ticket. I clenched my teeth and bought a ticket to Bing City. I was determined to go home today. I arrived at Bing City at 3:30 in the afternoon. I looked at the snow outside and suddenly thought of Chun Ming's warm welcome at the airport in Guangzhou. I called an unlicensed taxi and rode on the highway against the wind and snow. I was still on the way, and I estimated that I would reach home in an hour and a half. I had just recovered from a major illness. I started writing this chapter at 6 in the morning, and I used my phone to connect to the computer to update it. There's only one chapter left, because I can already see my fellow Taoist with a cold, who left me this morning. He's slowly coming back with a lecherous smile. Damn the snow, damn the airport, damn the cold. Chapter 1609. It's been 2,000 years. Gu Hong, since your disciple is here, we can begin. At the instant the sovereign of ancient Zhang's presence surged into the sky, and all of ancient Zong worshipped him. Tianxiu Luo's voice brought with it a power that seemed to be able to pierce through the world and crush all chaos. When it reverberated in the air, he stood on the third tower as if he was with the sovereign of ancient Zong. There is no need for us to take action to verify boundless Tao. If the three of us take action, ancient Zong will not need to exist. There is no need for us to discuss Tao either. The three of us firmly believe in Tao. No matter how much we discuss it, it will be useless. It's just like how it has been during the many discussions of Tao over the past 2,000 years. Gu Hong's gaze was calm as he looked at the other two people who stood at the peak of ancient Zong. Tianxiu Luo, what you want to prove is your own Tao, which is the true, boundless Tao. The sovereign emperor is not taking the initiative here, because his legacy is the legacy of the emperor of ancient Zong, and the emperor of ancient Zong has never needed us to determine whether his boundless Tao is real or fake. As for this old man, I really do want to know if the Tao I've cultivated in my life and the realm I've stepped into right now is an illusion or the bright moon in the sky. As the old man's words echoed in the air, Su Ming stood by his side with a calm expression. He watched everything happening before him, and he knew that this was a rare chance for him to witness a ceremony. To him, this kind of ceremony was equivalent to good fortune. The Azura was silent for a moment before a cold smile appeared on his face. His emotionless voice slowly echoed out. How? You could have chosen, but you purposely ignored it. Instead, you chose to defeat me and the Emperor to prove your boundless Tao. Xiao Luo, why ask a question you already know the answer to? The old man was silent for a moment before he suddenly spoke, and a hint of determination appeared on his face. When he said those words, the sovereign of ancient Zong lifted his head swiftly. After staring at the old man for a moment, the middle-aged sovereign suddenly laughed. Are you talking about ancient Zong heaven? Ancient Zong heaven. A dark light shone in Tian Xiao Luo's eyes. After a moment of silence, he swung his arm. Very well. There are 33 skies in ancient Zong. In the past, the Emperor of ancient Zong stepped through 32 skies and reached boundless Tao realm. It is said that only those who have surpassed the power of boundless Tao realm can step into the final sky. Those who have surpassed the 30th sky cannot step into it. Ancient Zong sky. Since the two of you have already made your choice, I will step into it with you. As Tian Xiao Luo's voice echoed in the air, it was filled with determination and determination. He had indeed intentionally ignored the existence of ancient Zong heaven. He wanted to win against the sovereign emperor in Guhong and become the strongest in ancient Zong to prove his Tao. But right then, he still chose the path that he could not take if he was not in boundless Tao realm. This was not his earliest choice, because he cared about success and failure. But now, this was the only way. The old man lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky. With it, the sky roared, and the clouds tumbled about as if they had turned into a raging sea. That raging sea tumbled about, and in an instant, it covered the entire sky of ancient Zong. In that case, I will use my own cultivation base to split open the heavens. When the old man's words echoed in the air, the sky immediately roared. The tumbling clouds looked as if they were about to shatter. Cracks filled the air, as if they were about to connect to an ancient world. At the same time, Tian Xiao Luo's voice echoed in the air. I will now open the burial gate. Tian Xiao Luo pushed his right hand against the ground. With it, all of ancient Zong roared. Fog instantly rose from all directions, and it contained a thick aura of death. It was the resentment gathered by the people who had died over the years. At that moment, that resentment tumbled backwards and charged towards the capital, straight towards Tian Xiao Luo's right hand. The sovereign sighed softly on the tower at the center. He lifted his hands and looked as if he was propping them up against the sky. The source of ancient Zong was originally beyond the 33 skies. With ancient Zhang's kismet and with me, the sovereign of ancient Zong, I will open the heavens of ancient Zong. When he said those words, he tore at the sky with his hands. With it, the world roared, and the loud booming sounds reverberated in all directions, shaking the sky and earth. At the instant the sky was torn apart, a huge vortex was formed at the center. It tumbled up, and the layers of clouds and fog the old man had stirred up instantly turned white. They were all swept into the vortex. At the same time, the resentment of death on the ground charged into the sky. Once it fused into the vortex, it turned black. During that instant, it looked as if there were only two colors left in the world, black and white. There was no sky, and neither was there any ground. Only the three of them, and Su Ming could see above them when they lifted their heads. Half of the vortex was black, and the other half was white. As it rotated, it looked as if it had turned into a huge rune, but it was not a rune. It was ancient Zhang's heavens. Booming sounds reverberated in all directions. Tian Xiao Luo threw his head back and let out a shrill howl. He took a step forward and charged at the black and white vortex above him. I will be the first to step into ancient Zhang's heavens and verify my boundless Tao. While his words echoed in the air, he had already turned into a long arc and instantly closed in on the black and white vortex. At that moment, it did not matter whether it was the sovereign, the old man, or Su Ming. All of them were staring at the black and white vortex as well as Tianxiu Luo. First layer. When Tianxiu Luo's voice rang in the air, his body shot through the vortex and rushed above it. Loud booming sounds shook the sky, and Su Ming immediately saw that behind the black and white vortex was 33 layers of the sky, just like the name 33 skies. Perhaps more accurately speaking, there were 33 vortexes. Ninth layer. Tianxiu Luo charged forward with an unstoppable force. As booming sounds continued echoing in the air, he continued moving through the vortexes, causing them to ring out endlessly. 20th layer. His voice seemed to have come from the distance. His figure had already become indistinct in Su Ming's eyes, but he could see that not only did Tianxiu Luo not slow down, he was instead becoming faster. There was determination in his figure, along with his desire and belief towards boundless Tao. He wanted to prove his madness. 23rd layer. When Tianxiu Luo's voice rang out again, booming sounds accompanied it. They were the loud sounds caused by him shooting through the vortexes. Every single time they echoed in the air, the entire world would tremble. It could be said that only the three of them had the right to step into ancient Zhang's heavens. The others did not even have the right to see it. After all, at that moment, ancient Zhang was in a state of chaos. If Su Ming had not been with the old man, it would have been difficult for him to see ancient Zhang's heavens. When the booming sounds echoed in the air, Tianxiu Luo's voice rang out again and spread through the world. 26th layer. It was already difficult for Su Ming to see Tianxiu Luo. Everything he could see was indistinct, but he did not give up. At that moment, he sucked in a deep breath and circulated all his cultivation base to gather it in his eyes. When his third eye opened at the center of his brow, he activated all 8 overlapping great Tao paragons, but even so, he could only see some shadows. However, as he paid attention to the huge vortex, a strange light slowly shone in Su Ming's eyes. His breathing quickened slightly, and his pupils gradually shrank. This vortex, why does it give me a hint of familiarity? This familiarity is a presence. Su Ming's breathing quickened. He already had a vague answer in his heart, but he was slightly uncertain about it. 29th layer. Gu Hong, ancient emperor, watch carefully. See whether I can step into the 30th layer. At that moment, Tianxiu Luo's voice came from the vortex. At the same time, it did not matter whether it was the old man or the sovereign of ancient Zhang. They immediately focused their gazes in an unprecedented manner. Su Ming could not see much. He could only see a shadow, but it was enough for him to tell whether Tianxiu Luo had succeeded. Booming sounds echoed madly at that moment. They surged into the sky again and again, stirring up the vortex and throwing space into chaos. When the booming sounds reached a certain intensity, the old man sighed softly. The sovereign of ancient Zhang slowly averted his gaze, but there was a resolute look in his eyes. Impossible. My Tao has already reached the peak, and my cultivation base has already reached its limit. I've already reached the end of my path, so why can't I step into the 30th sky? A shrill roar came from the vortex. It was Tianxiu Luo's voice. There was an unwillingness to admit defeat in his voice, along with madness. As he spoke, the booming sounds grew louder. They were formed when he tried repeatedly to step into the 30th sky. The booming sounds lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. Tianxiu Luo's madness did not stop for a single moment. His shrill voice would occasionally be accompanied by forlorn laughter filled with an unwillingness to admit defeat, and it fell into Su Ming's ears. On the 8th day, the sound stopped. Tianxiu Luo's body slowly descended from the huge black and white vortex. When he landed, his appearance had changed drastically. An ancient air filled his body, and his face was pale. When he appeared from the vortex with anguish, he looked at the old man. I have never stepped into Boundless Tao Realm. Boundless Tao Realm? What is Boundless Tao Realm? The old man was silent. After some time, he said softly, There is a limit to life, but there is no limit to knowledge. How many cycles of reincarnation can there be? Boundless Tao Realm. When the old man spoke and Tian Xiu Luo descended, the sovereign of ancient Zong lifted his head. Since ancient Zong sky has already been activated, then I will try it as well. His voice was calm. At the instant he spoke, he lifted his right hand and swung his arm. He flew up, and it was as if all of ancient Zhang's kismet had risen to the sky. It surrounded him and turned into a layer of obscurity as he charged towards the black and white vortex. My cold has indeed returned. My tonsils are swollen in the morning, and it's difficult for me to breathe. I was in the hospital in the morning, and I've had a hard time in the afternoon. But I can't update this chapter with just one chapter. No matter what, I will update 2 chapters today. The next chapter will be late. Give me time. Chapter 16:10. At that moment, it did not matter whether it was the sovereign charging towards the vortex, the anguished Tianxiu Luo, or the old man. None of them noticed the change in Su Ming's expression when he stared at the vortex, and a huge storm raged in the depths of his heart. This familiar presence belongs to the bald crane. Su Ming mumbled in his heart, causing his breathing to quicken. The presence was very faint, but no matter how faint it was, Su Ming would never forget it. Because besides the bald crane's presence, there was another great presence in the vortex. That presence was like a contrast. So Su Ming not only sensed the bald crane, but also the owner of that great presence. It was Xianzong. It was Xianzang's presence as he sat on the feng shui compass in the vast universe. Ancient Zong sky and the 33 skies are the path to reach boundless Tao realm to them. But to me, this is the path to leave this world and return to the vast universe, to open my eyes. Once I take that step into the 33 skies, I will be able to wake up and this possession will end. Su Ming's heart trembled. At that moment, an epiphany rose in his heart, and it gradually became a brand that was etched deeply into his mind. This is my path. Resolve gradually appeared in Su Ming's eyes. At that moment, the sovereign of ancient Zong had already disappeared into the vortex. As booming sounds rang in the air and he charged forward, he instantly stepped into the 20th sky. Unlike Sura Luo, he didn't say a single word as he proceeded onward. Soon, he reached the 22nd level, the 23rd level, the 24th level. When he reached the 29th level, he came to a stop. At that moment, Tianxiu Luo stared at the vortex. His heart was filled with incredibly complicated emotions. Based on his personal will, he did not wish for the sovereign to succeed, but he also wanted to know what it meant to reach boundless Tao realm. Only when someone reached it would he be able to answer his questions. The old man's expression did not change much. It did not matter whether it was regret or anticipation. They did not seem to be strong. Even at that moment, he only lifted his head and stared at the vortex. The sovereign of ancient Zong only stopped for the span of a few breaths before he charged towards the 30th sky without any hesitation. Once he stepped into the 30th sky, he would prove that he had reached boundless Tao realm. Boom, 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 boom. A series of shocking sounds echoed out in all directions. It was the same sound as when Azura had tried to step into the 30th sky and had been blocked by a thunderous boom. His voice only lasted for the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn before it gradually disappeared. Unlike Tianxiu Luo, who had tried for 7 days and 7 nights out of indignation, the sovereign of ancient Zong had only tried 9 times. 9 times. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, he failed to enter the 30th heaven. He chose to give up and slowly descended. When he emerged from the black and white vortex, no bitterness could be seen on his face. No paleness could be seen on his face, only regret. The sovereign of ancient Zong landed on the tower and said softly, "I have yet to reach boundless Tao realm. By the looks of it, I did not manage to completely sever the kismet I severed." He might be regretful, but he was also at ease. Perhaps the more determined a person was, the more pressure they would have to bear in the face of failure. And people like the sovereign of ancient Zong, who did not care too much about boundless Tao realm, were able to pick it up and put it down at that moment. As for Tianxiu Luo, from the moment he also failed in his own heart. It was as if he had lost his way. In the process of searching for his Tao, he had strayed far into the distance, and when he turned his head around, he did not know where he had gone. The old man was silent for a moment, then turned his head around to look at Su Ming. Both of you have tried, so I will try as well. Let's see whether the Tao I severed is real or fake. Su Ming also looked at the old man. I will scout the path for you. If I am real, then you must stay here, but if I am wrong, I will not change what I promised you in the past. The old man cast a deep look at Su Ming, and a kind smile appeared on his face. When he turned around, he turned into a long arc that charged towards the huge black and white vortex in the sky. Su Ming stared at the old man's back. Before he left, the old man's words made Su Ming remember how the old man had opened the door to his house in the courtyard and waited for him to acknowledge him as his master. He also remembered the old man's words in the past. I will help you prove your Tao. If you are wrong, then you will inherit my legacy. And if I am wrong, then I will help you leave this place. When those words echoed in the air, the sky roared. The old man rushed into the vortex like a long arc, and as booming sounds rang in the air, the layers of the world continuously shattered. The sovereign of ancient Zhong lifted his head and stared at everything in the vortex. In silence, Tianxiu Luo was also watching. Gu Hong was slightly different to the two of them, because Gu Hong's Tao was not as limitless as Kismet, nor was it as domineering as Tianxiu Luo's. It was a Tao regarding the truth and falsehood of the entire world. It was a Tao that they had once not understood, and even now, they still did not try to understand it at a deeper level. That Tao was a mixture of truth and falsehood. Everything that was real, and everything that was fake would always remain as an illusion. At that moment, when the old man rushed into the vortex, the test was about to begin. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. The old man rushed up to the 20th layer, then the 23rd layer, the 26th layer, the 29th layer. He did not stop for even a single moment. Instead, he rushed out and charged towards the 30th layer. At that moment, it did not matter whether it was the sovereign or Tianxiu Luo. All of them paid close attention to the vortex. Su Ming's pupils shrank, and he focused all his attention on the vortex. Boom! A sound that shook the heavens and the earth, one that could be said to be the loudest sound ever since the black and white vortex had appeared, reverberated in the heavens and the earth, reverberated in all directions, reverberated in the entire world, and reverberated in the entire sky. 30th day. Tianxiu Luo staggered. When he took a few steps back, he suddenly laughed loudly, but there was anguish in his laughter. It was an incredibly strong unwillingness to admit defeat. In a vortex, the old man stepped into the 30th layer. Once he stepped into the 30th layer, it meant that he had reached boundless Tao realm. At that moment, not only was Tianxiu Luo in anguish, the sovereign of ancient Zhang's expression also changed. He stared at the vortex, and his breathing quickened. A loud bang immediately rang out in Su Ming's mind. He sucked in a deep breath and stared at the old man in the vortex. He could vaguely see that the old man had stopped at the 30th layer, and no one knew what he was thinking about. Time trickled by. In the blink of an eye, several hours passed. The old man who stood at the 30th layer took a step forward. When booming sounds shook the sky and earth again, he stood at the 31st layer. The earth has an end, but the sky has no end. How many lives can one live without end? So that's how it is. It was also at that moment that the old man's voice traveled down from the 31st layer. There was no joy in his voice as he mumbled. Instead, there was anguish in his voice, and it seemed to be a sigh. When it echoed in the air, it puzzled Tianxiu Luo, and uncertainty appeared on the sovereign's face. So that's how it is. The old man's laughter echoed in the air, and the bitterness on his face turned into something close to madness. It was as if he had seen something, understood something. However, no matter what, the bitterness and madness in his laughter would cause anyone who heard it to feel a sense of sorrow. Gu Hong, what did you see? Tianxiu Luo immediately asked. His voice traveled into the vortex. I saw a world that all of you can't see and can't imagine. Su Ming, you are right. Your Tao is right. I was wrong, because to me, this Tao has never been right to begin with. What is the world? What is void? What is true and false? What is reincarnation? Wrong, right? So that's how it is. The old man's laughter became even more crazed. In it, he seemed to have lowered his head. His gaze pierced through the 31st layer and landed on Su Ming. Su Ming could sense that gaze. He could also sense the sadness in it, as well as the will to part. It was the feeling of life and death. It was a feeling that made him feel as if he was about to be separated from him forever. Master, Su Ming's heart trembled, and he instinctively said, "You are right, but I still hope that many years later, you will still remember that you have a master in this illusory world that appeared because of a possession." When the old man spoke languidly, there was no longer any anguish in his voice. Instead, there was a sigh, and it seemed to be a sigh for the world and his own life. There is no end to Tao, and your thoughts are boundless. But if I don't search for it and release it, make everything go back to the beginning, then it will be as if I am going against my Tao. Su Ming, I will become your 9th overlapping Tao divinity, and with it, I will help you break through the illusory 33rd sky. I will help you win this possession, and I will help you return home. As he spoke, the old man's laughter was filled with madness. Endless light shone from his body. It illuminated the entire 33rd sky, but during that instant, it gathered into a long arc and charged downward from the 31st sky. It shot through the vortex and charged straight towards the center of Su Ming's brow. Master, Su Ming instinctively wanted to dodge. He knew what was about to happen, but before he could do so, the long arc shot through space and appeared in front of him. It landed straight into the third eye at the center of his brow. Because you are my disciple, my only disciple, since I have made a mistake, then I will definitely make my disciple continue to be right. I hope that I will use this method to make my Tao last forever. A loud bang rang out in Su Ming's mind. At the instant the long arc landed at the center of his brow, Gu Hong's ancient and kind voice echoed in Su Ming's head. At that moment, tears fell from Su Ming's eyes. Gu Hong had gone against his Tao, scattered his boundless Tao, and was willing to become his disciple's 9th overlapping Tao divinity. This was Gu Hong's master. He had been as lonely as a feather his entire life, but for the Bao Su Ming had given him in the past, he was willing to give up everything. Chapter 16:11. Tears fell from Su Ming's eyes. His original 8 overlapping Great Tao Paragons in his 3rd, I had also gained a 9th overlapping Great Tao Paragon. Once they fused together, they turned into a 9th overlapping Tao Divinity. The 9th overlapping Tao Divinity was Su Ming's appearance, and at that moment, he was also crying. The voice echoing in Su Ming's mind was still there, but the owner of that voice could no longer be seen. However, in Su Ming's heart, his master was always around, and he would forever exist in his Tao divinity. Gu Hong, Su Ming's 9th overlapping Tao divinity. The scene of Gu Hong's choice shocked Tian Xiu Luo, and the sovereign of ancient Zhang's heart trembled. Disbelief appeared on his face. They had not expected that Gu Hong would make such a choice while laughing crazily after he stepped into the 31st sky. Perhaps by using this method to focus all of his hopes on his successor, he can continue walking down his Tao. Gu Hong, I've never admired anyone in my life. You are the only one. Azura was silent for a moment before he spoke softly in his heart. He stared at Su Ming, as if he could vaguely see Gu Hong, his fellow Taoist who had fought against him his entire life. As he continued watching, understanding gradually appeared in Tian Xiu Luo's eyes. Go. Your master chose to defy Tao for you, and chose to become your 9th overlapping Tao divinity so that he could give you the right to step into ancient Zhong sky. Su Ming, don't disappoint your master. No matter what your Tao is, walk down it with determination, Tian Xiu Luo said calmly. His voice echoed in all directions. At that moment, he did not have any other thoughts in his mind. He only had a hint of sadness in his heart as he sighed at the universe, Guhong's sigh, and his blessings for Su Ming. Su Ming was silent. The 9 overlapping Tao divinities at the center of his brow were swiftly fusing together. His cultivation base erupted madly, and, as it rose, it continuously changed his level of cultivation, causing his realm to swiftly rise. This was the crucial step for an 8th overlapping Tao divinity to become a 9th overlapping Tao divinity. This step was incredibly difficult for all great Tao paragons, and it was a great serendipity that could only be obtained through luck. Yet at that moment, Su Ming might have obtained it, but he did not feel happy in his heart. "This is Tao." A sigh tumbled out of the sovereign of ancient Zhang's mouth and echoed in the world. "I don't care about this body. I don't care about the Tao. I don't care about my physical body. I don't care about my life and death. I don't even care about the continuation of my life. I only care about the Tao. I care about the continuation of the Tao. I care about the Tao." This is Lone Swan, and also the reason why he surpassed us and could step into the 31st heaven. The Tao is boundless. The will is boundless. So that's how it is. When the sovereign of ancient Zhang's sigh echoed in the air, he looked at Su Ming. There was no longer a complicated look in his eyes, but encouragement. "It doesn't matter if you're Xian or not. No matter who you are, keep walking. Let your Tao and Lone Swan's Tao continue on. Don't let yourself have any regrets. Don't let Lone Swan down." Su Ming was silent. He slowly lifted his head and stared at the black and white vortex in the sky. He stared at the path leading out of the place and the end of the possession. In silence, once the 9 overlapping Tao divinities in Su Ming's third eye fused with Guhong, they shone with a light that belonged solely to Su Ming. That light was not white, and neither was it black, but purple. Purple long robes, purple long hair, and purple eyes. At that moment, Su Ming's world was purple. During the day, that purple was not as black as night, but during the night, it was a darkness that not even the night sky could dye. He sucked in a deep breath and took a step forward. At the instant his foot landed, his body let out a bang and turned into a long arc that charged into the sky. He was so fast that he instantly appeared under the black and white vortex. In fact, half of his body was already in it. With just half a step, he would be able to enter ancient Zhong's sky. It was not that he could not take that half a step forward, but that his body had stopped for a moment based on his will. During it, Su Ming turned his head around to look at ancient Zhang's world. This might be the last time he could see ancient Zhang's world, because this time, Su Ming told himself that he had to succeed. With it, Su Ming saw the vast land, 7 moons sect, the rise and fall of the mountain range, and all his experiences during the 3,000 years. In fact, he even seemed to see how vaguely. With it, he also saw the faces he met in ancient Zhong. After a long while, a look of farewell appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He turned around swiftly, and with his Tao and Guhong's Tao, he took half a step into ancient Zhong sky. When his foot landed, Su Ming instantly stepped into the vortex and into ancient Zhong sky. What awaited him was the path of the 33 skies. The end of that path was to walk out of the 33 skies and the world of possession. To open his eyes, the world roared. Clouds and fog surrounded Su Ming, and he was surrounded by a vast expanse of space. It gave him the same feeling as the endless galaxy he saw when he left harmonious Morris Alba in the past. He did not pay any attention to his surroundings. He did not think too much about it in his head. He only had his heart set on Tao seeking and rushed forward. Su Ming turned all his cultivation base into a long arc that charged upwards with an indomitable will. Boom! A loud bang reverberated in the air. Su Ming felt as if he had broken through a barrier, and at the instant he did so, he felt as if he had broken through a sky. Su Ming knew that it was the first sky of ancient Zhong. There were still 32 skies ahead of him. The path of Tao verification was right under his feet. He could not turn his head back, and he could not turn his head back. Resolve appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Not only did he not slow down, he even became faster, and booming sounds rang out all along the way. The second sky, the third sky, the fourth sky. Every single time booming sounds shook the sky. It meant that Su Ming had stepped into a sky. When he stepped into the ninth sky, he looked down, and all he saw was a haze. However, he could see the gazes of the sovereign of ancient Zong and Tianxiu Luo in that haze. There was expectation in their gazes, and there was not a hint of personal grudges in them. It was a form of respect towards Dao, or rather, it was respect towards Gu Hong's choice to help Su Ming. They wanted to know whether Gu Hong's choice would succeed. There were no longer any tears in Su Ming's eyes, but in the depths of his heart, Gu Hong's figure was an eternal existence. Tears of sorrow could not give him more power to rush out. Only by using reality to prove that rushing out of the 33 skies could Gu Hong smile. The resolve in Su Ming's eyes grew stronger. He swiftly increased his speed, and as the long arc charged forward, he touched the 10th sky. Booming sounds shook the sky again, but Su Ming did not change his speed. He continued rushing to the 11th sky. Just like that, Su Ming had all his power erupt from his body. With his power of the 9th level of Tao Divinity Realm, he broke through the 13th sky, crushed the 16th sky, tore through the 19th sky, and trampled through the 22nd sky. A crazed feeling spread out from Su Ming's body without him even trying to hide it. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mind had already descended into madness. That madness did not cause his thoughts to be jumbled up. Instead, it turned into a madness of stubbornness, and what made him stubborn was his determination to rush to the 33rd sky. I will step into the 33rd sky. Su Ming threw his head back and roared. His speed increased exponentially again, but this time it was no longer the power of his cultivation base. Instead, his 4 great wills had fused into it. As his will and cultivation base erupted, Su Ming's resolve burned as if he was burning. He crushed the 24th sky with his purple figure surrounded by a crazed presence. Even if he was badly battered, he still managed to crush the 26th sky. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, Su Ming stepped into the 28th sky. When he was there, he lifted his head and stared at the 29th sky. He could vaguely see the 30th sky after the 29th sky, the 30th sky that no one could step into unless they reached boundless Tao realm. After the 9th level of Tao Divinity Realm is boundless Tao realm. This boundless Tao realm is just like how your thoughts have no bounds. You need to sever your own Tao, then you can make your Tao boundless and your thoughts have no bounds. When Su Ming said those words softly, the flames of determination appeared in his red eyes. He sucked in a deep breath during the 28th sky, but he did not exhale it. Instead, he kept it in his body and turned into a long arc that charged to the 29th sky. His speed became faster, and in the end, he practically turned into a shooting star that defied the heavens. The next instant, he crashed into the barrier in the sky of the 29th sky. Boom! The sound reverberated in the universe. At the instant it spread through all of ancient Zong, the barrier in front of Su Ming crumbled. He instantly stepped into the 29th sky. At that moment, before him was the 30th sky that the sovereign of ancient Zong could not step into, and the sovereign of ancient Zong could not. 30th sky. The flames of resolve in Su Ming's eyes spread through his entire body and his mind. His cultivation base erupted at full force, and the third eye at the center of his brow shone with a dazzling light. Within it, the eyes of his 9th level Tao Divinity realm shone brilliantly. The 4 great wills also erupted from Su Ming's body at that moment. Once they fused with his resolve, they turned into Su Ming's madness. He did not roar, but in silence, like a volcano that was about to erupt, he wanted to send the madness of its eruption to the 30th sky. He instantly flew up. From the distance, he looked like a moth, and the 30th sky was like a sky of fire. It instantly closed in on him. My Tao is my resolve. It is the faces that I will never forget, no matter how many times I reincarnate. is the promise I made to them in harmonious Morris Alba. I will resurrect them. I will make all that I lost return to me. This is my Tao, and what I want to sever is not this Tao. Instead, from then on, I will no longer have any truth or falsehood, no dreams, no possession, no talent, no destiny. What I want to sever is my life of moving from midwinter to spring. What I want to sever is the person that will be missing in the eternal years to come. Su Ming's body looked as if it had been set on fire. During that instant, he crashed into the barrier of the 30th sky. Booming sounds stirred up the world and shook the entire area. Chapter 16:12. In Su Ming's eyes, the 30 skies were no longer skies. They were a blade, a shining blade that lay horizontally in the sky. That blade was as bright as the sky, which was why it turned into 30 skies and became a ravine that blocked all those who were not in boundless Tao realm. It was not impossible to cross it, but if anyone wanted to do so, they would need the determination to cut down their Tao. It did not matter whether the Tao they cut down was right or wrong. What was important was their determination. Tianxiu Luo thought that he possessed this determination and that he had cut down his Tao, but when he saw Gu Hong going against his Tao and giving up on everything to help Su Ming, he understood that in terms of determination, he could not compare to Gu Hong. The sovereign of ancient Zhong also understood this. The two of them also understood why they could not step into the 30 skies. It was not because the Tao they cut was right or wrong, but because their determination was not strong enough. They had too many fetters, and with them around, it was difficult for them to cut down their Tao completely. It did not matter whether it was kismet or creation. If they did not have complete determination, then they would not be able to walk down boundless Tao realm. Su Ming crashed into the 30 skies at that moment. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth. When they reverberated in the air, the world trembled. The sovereign of ancient Zhang's eyes focused on them, and Tianxiu Luo's eyes shone brilliantly. As their attention was fully focused, they stared at the black and white vortex and at Su Ming, who was like a moth flying into a flame. Su Ming crashed into the 30 skies. When the loud bangs reverberated in the air, it was like a shining blade cutting down on him. He did not dodge or avoid it. With his resolve and determination, Su Ming took a step towards the blade cutting down at him without any hesitation. The blade cut through Su Ming's body as if it had pierced through him. It flashed past him in an instant. It did not cut down any blood, and neither did it leave behind any wounds, but it cut down Su Ming's destiny. It might sound like an illusion, but in truth, what was cut down was Su Ming's choice, because life, destiny, and cutting down his Tao was in truth a choice. He had to choose between his past and his future. If he chose to cut off his past, then Su Ming would have a glorious future. And if he chose to cut off his future, then he could retain his eternal past. No one but Su Ming himself knew exactly what he had chosen. Be it the sovereign of ancient Zhong or Tianxiu Luo, they could only tell that Su Ming had severed his Tao, but if Su Ming did not say what his choice was, no one else would know. When the blade fell, booming sounds reverberated in the air, and it was reduced to shards. Once they shattered layer by layer, they turned into the shattering of the entire sky, causing Su Ming's foot to slowly descend. He had already surpassed the 29th sky and stepped into the 30th sky. At the instant Su Ming stepped into the place, he stood in the 30th sky with his head lowered. He did not look at the ground, neither did he look at his surroundings. Instead, he was quietly experiencing something. The hearts of the sovereign and Tianxiu Luo in ancient Zhang's capital trembled at that moment. They stared blankly at Su Ming, standing on the 30th layer in the vortex. They did not say a single word. They only watched him quietly. After a long, long time, Su Ming slowly lifted his head. His third eye could no longer be seen at the center of his brow, and neither could his 9 overlapping Tao divinities. During that instant, he seemed to have become indescribably different compared to before. He sighed softly. When he lifted his head, his gaze landed on the 31st sky above him. Over there was a world the sovereign of ancient Zhong and Tianxiu Luo could not see. When Su Ming saw the 31st sky clearly, he also understood why Gu Hong had been standing there silently. Su Ming saw a huge figure sitting in space. Beneath him was a feng shui compass, and on his wrist was a string of pearls. He was dressed in a long black robe. It was Xianzong, or rather, he was the emperor of ancient Zong, who had gone missing in ancient Zhang's palace and was believed to be dead. Clearly, he had not died completely. Instead, he was floating in the vast universe, searching for a miracle that could resurrect him among the harmonious Morris albas. Su Ming stared at the illusory figure quietly. It was also what Gu Hong had seen when he stood there. When he saw it clearly, he also understood what Su Ming had told him a long time ago. Su Ming remained silent for a long time before he took a step forward. He walked towards the sky, and with one step at a time, he arrived at the barrier of the 31st sky. With one step, he walked past it. When he stood in the 31st sky and looked above him, ancient Zhang's figure became clearer. It also allowed Su Ming to see the bald crane's presence spreading out from ancient Zhang's clenched fist. That presence made Su Ming remember the feather he had grabbed in his hand when the bald crane was swept into space. However, Su Ming could not see the emperor of ancient Zhang's face clearly. It seemed rather indistinct, but even if it was indistinct and he could not see it clearly, Su Ming could still vaguely sense that the face was the exact same as his own. I believe that when Master stood here and chose to go against his Tao, he must have sensed this figure's face just like I did now. Su Ming sighed softly and mumbled. While the sigh echoed in the air, Su Ming took another step forward. When it landed, the 31st sky crumbled in front of him. The sky of the 32nd sky also shattered at that instant when Su Ming walked forward. When Su Ming stood in the 32nd sky, he could almost see the figure sitting on the huge feng shui compass in space clearly. That figure was Su Ming himself. "What did you see?" Tianxiu Luo asked after remaining silent for a moment in ancient Zhang's capital, which was beyond the black and white vortex. Tianxiu Luo had asked Gu Hong this question before, and the answer Gu Hong gave him made Tianxiu Luo seem to have understood something. When he asked Su Ming again, Su Ming did not give him a similar answer. "I saw myself," Su Ming said softly. His voice echoed in the 32nd sky. When it spread through the entire universe, Su Ming stared at the figure on the feng shui compass and took a step towards the 33rd sky. When his foot landed, the 33rd sky disappeared before Su Ming, as if it had never existed, causing Su Ming to walk to the 33rd sky as if he had arrived in front of the huge figure sitting on the feng shui compass. He seemed to only be one step away from the center of the figure's brows. While standing there, Su Ming stared at the huge figure for a long, long time. In silence, a myriad of thoughts flashed through his mind. He thought of many people and many things. When he sighed softly, he fused all his thoughts into that sigh, causing it to echo for all eternity and never disappear. Then, he took the final step. During the process, purple light spread out from Su Ming's body. It reached 100,000 feet and pierced through the 33rd sky. It descended on the ground and chased away all the fog. Space itself was scattered, causing ancient Zong to look as if it had turned purple. Su Ming lowered his head and stared at the world beneath him. He saw a figure in a straw cape standing in the snow and wind outside the gate of the royal city. That figure was Tian Xiezi. He seemed to be staring at Su Ming, and a smile appeared on his face. There was a reluctance to part in that smile, as well as a wish to bid farewell to Su Ming. He saw that Dao Han was no longer in isolation in Seven Moon's sect. Instead, he stood on the coffin and stared at the sky. There was a complicated look on his face, along with respect that came from the bottom of his heart. He stared at the sky quietly. In one Dao sect's region, in the dimension that seemed to have been isolated and destroyed, was Great Dao Paragon Sun Mu. He was also staring at the sky in a daze. It was no longer night in the sky. The sun was bright, and when a ray of sunlight shone on the side of his face, it made the shadow behind him look like Su Ming's second senior brother, who stood in the Garden of the Nine Summits with a gentle smile on his face. There was also a woman who dragged her exhausted body out of a cave abode in a mountain range on the ground. She was Su Hui. Her face was slightly pale, and when she stared at the sky, there was a focused look on her face. There seemed to be a soft sigh in her heart that could not be heard. And it was just like the little boy sitting on the tree of Tao verification that replaced the sky in Hao Hao's world. He seemed to be able to see Su Ming quietly, and he smiled happily. He lifted his hand and waved goodbye to Su Ming. Hao Hao has already returned home. Big brother, you're going home as well. It was just like the headless figure sitting cross-legged at the top of the city in the world under the tree. At that moment, it seemed to move slightly, becoming a part of the bustling city and the laughter coming from the palace. Laughter reverberated in the air. Di Tian's happy voice and the happiness of the people from his sect around him lingered for a long time. While no one was paying attention to him, he lifted his head slightly as he held his wine cup. He looked as if he was drinking, but in truth, he was looking at the sky. His gaze was filled with blessings. It was just like Lei Chun. The light in Dark Mountain Tribe could not be extinguished by the wind. There was a melancholy that could not be seen behind the tree crown in the sky, but there was no need for any wind to blow at it. That melancholy came from Lei Chun. He stood in his tribe and laughed while looking at the sky. As he laughed, tears fell down his cheeks. It was just like old man extermination. He lifted his head at that moment and stared at the sky. Anguish gradually appeared on his face, and it turned into a sigh. Su Ming averted his gaze. His expression was incredibly calm at that moment. His eyes were no longer red, but had turned clear. He had seen through all the bustling life in his life, and how many seasons had passed. Su Ming turned around, and his foot landed on the ground. When he took his final step, his body disappeared from the center of the brows of the black-robed man sitting on the feng shui compass. He disappeared for all eternity. A blizzard, a display of fireworks, a world of ancient song, and a sigh of departure. When he came, he woke up to a sense of unfamiliarity, but when he left, he only brought with him loneliness. Only Tao was like the purple light in the sky. Even if destiny had already disappeared, the purple sky was eternal. He felt like a cockroach. After feeling that the world was dark the day before, he felt that some sunlight had appeared on that day. He hoped that there would be more sunlight tomorrow, so that this fellow Taoist with the flu, whom he did not dare to offend, would leave. Ahem, there are plenty of people waiting for him. Go, go, fellow Taoist. Chapter 16:13. Su Ming stared at the terrified, harmonious Morris Alba. When he spoke faintly, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, his great and indescribable will left his body and charged towards the harmonious Morris Alba. The might of his will was so great that harmonious Morris Alba was like a bright moon before a firefly. The harmonious Morris Alba was powerless to struggle or fight back. It could only allow Su Ming's will to completely cover the harmonious Morris Alba and fuse into its four wings. At that moment, the galaxies in the four expanse cosmoses in harmonious Morris Alba's four wings shuddered at the same time. The expanse cosmoses instantly became still. During that silence, Su Ming's will swept through the lives like a storm. He did not harm them, but searched for the marks he needed. After the span of a few breaths, the four expanse cosmoses in harmonious Morris Alba returned to normal. Su Ming's will had already disappeared, but only the harmonious Morris Alba itself knew that the will of the existence that terrified it and had a vague impression of it in the depths of its memories had not left. Instead, it had split into several parts and gathered in the expanse cosmoses in its four wings. In its anxiety, it did not know what mark Su Ming was searching for. It could only hope that Su Ming would leave as soon as possible in the midst of its fear. The terror and strength from Su Ming's body caused it to be unable to fight back. In fact, it knew that if Su Ming wanted to kill it, he might just need to point at it. Time trickled by. Su Ming sat on the feng shui compass and floated in front of harmonious Morris Alba. His will had split into several parts, and each of them existed beside the people he had found who had the mark. He did not take away the mark straight away. Instead, he accompanied them as time passed. A long time passed, and harmonious Morris Alba's wings started overlapping, and the four expanse cosmoses started being destroyed when destruction and new life replaced each other. Su Ming left, bringing with him the mark he needed. After accompanying them for an aeon, his will left the harmonious Morris Alba, which had always been filled with anxiety, and returned to the body on the feng shui compass. Su Ming opened his eyes. He lifted his right hand. There were several weak souls on his palm. Among them were his eldest senior brother, second senior brother, Hu Zi, Song Lan, Yu Xian, Su Hui, his elder, and all the faces in Su Ming's memories. These people only had a hint of what they were, but they were not the people Su Ming wanted. When the harmonious Morris Alba spread its wings again, Su Ming had already left into the distance while sitting on the feng shui compass. He continued moving forward alone in the vast universe, and another 10,000 years passed. 10,000 years, 20,000 years, 30,000 years. Time passed without any sign. In the silence, when the second 100,000 years arrived, Su Ming opened his eyes again, because right in front of him was the ninth harmonious Morris Alba, who had been lucky enough to not run into Xianzong. It floated in the vast expanse, brimming with life force. The world within its four wings gave birth to countless living beings. In fact, when it noticed Su Ming's arrival, the harmonious Morris Alba forgot its instincts, perhaps because it had existed for too long. It even tried to show hostility, but the moment it showed up, it was crushed by the will spreading out from Su Ming's body. Shudders, fear, and shock instantly appeared on the harmonious Morris Alba. Su Ming did not bother himself with the harmonious Morris Alba's emotions. His will covered the harmonious Morris Alba's four wings and spread it inside. When he swept through the area, he found the marks, then spread them apart and gathered them together. While the harmonious Morris Alba was nervous, Su Ming did the same thing as before. He did not immediately choose to take away the marks he found, because if he did so, it would be the same as him personally killing the harmonious Morris Alba. He could not, and neither did he want to. He could wait until harmonious Morris Alba was destroyed and take away the marks. Time passed, and the harmonious Morris Alba became nervous. When the aeon ended, Su Ming did not stop. With the marks he found, he left the harmonious Morris Alba, which had begun the process of rebirth in its four wings. While the harmonious Morris Alba was nervous and anxious, Su Ming left. 100,000 years later, Su Ming ran into the harmonious Morris Alba, which he had bestowed life upon in the past, and he began searching for the marks again. The butterflies searched for the marks again and again. Time seemed to pass for an eternity, and 10 eons passed. Su Ming searched through all the butterflies and found all the marks he could find in the harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmoses. However, when all the marks were in Su Ming's hands, he let out a melancholic sigh while sitting on the feng shui compass with an ancient air about him. Each of the marks was independent. If he forcefully fused them together, the brand of life formed would lack the familiarity in Su Ming's memories. He could open the abyss gate and resurrect them, but after they were resurrected, they would not remember each other. In Su Ming's heart, they would become the most familiar strangers. Su Ming did not want to do that, and neither did he want to. He wanted to resurrect the faces in his memories. He hoped that the people who would be resurrected would still be themselves and still have their memories. He did not want their faces to be the same. In fact, even their souls would be the same, but there would be a sense of unfamiliarity between them. The cycle of life and death is like an ocean. Only by going through the cycles of life and death can I search for the marks they left behind when they disappeared. Only then can I fuse them together and turn them into the brand of life that belongs to them. Su Ming stared at his palm for a long, long time. When he mumbled under his breath, he clenched his palm and placed the marks on it in his heart. When he unfurled his palm, he gently pushed down on the feng shui compass beneath him. With it, The feng shui compass shuddered and slowly started rotating on its own. As it did so, the entire vast expanse cosmos seemed to be dragged in and rotated. When time passed, the boundless vast expanse cosmos turned into a huge vortex. It rotated with loud, rumbling sounds and turned into circles. In Su Ming's eyes, each time the vast expanse completed a complete revolution, it would be a cycle of life and death. As the vast expanse tumbled about in the vortex, Su Ming lifted the sediments of time and the dust that had fallen into the depths of the vast expanse before his eyes. At the instant the vortex rotated eternally, Su Ming left the feng shui compass and walked into it. No matter how much time would pass, and no matter how many cycles of life and death he would go through, he would continue walking forward with determination. In the passage of time, he would search for the marks they left behind when they disappeared in the cycles of life and death. He would retain the memories of each other and the promise they made to each other, all for the sake of longing for each other, getting to know each other, and meeting each other. During the dark night, when harmonious Morris Alba shattered and the souls in his palms scattered, he already knew that if he did not persist, they might never meet again in the next life. It was as if he had waited for the heavens to fall silent in the palace in the heavens for millions of years. He would dream of his soul and cherish his loved ones. And from then on, there would be no more life in the world. If only the first time they met each other, seeking for demons, was about to end. If it was not tomorrow, it would be the day after tomorrow. This chapter contained 2,000 words. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.